Welcome to another exciting episode of the Collect and Destroy podcast. I'm your host, the Baxter Puppets. On this week's podcast, we sit down once again with my good friend, skull builder extraordinaire, fellow metalhead, horror fan, and devoted father. He's Hoffman, Hoff Machine. Ken Hoffman, welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, Baxter. Thanks for having me back, man.
It's good to have you. What's new? What's going on?
Same. Still teening it over here. Still quarantining it. Albeit I've got two more family members. I recently got back from a cross country trip. My mother and my sister were living in Jersey still. I had moved to California like 12 years ago, but I've been trying to get them to move across the U.S. and be out here with me for a while. My mom's older. She's in remission from cancer. My sister is developmentally disabled. So I was like, you guys have to be out here by me. So we decided that in the midst of a global pandemic, it would be a great idea for me to rent an RV, move across the country, pack them up, and move them back. And that's what we did. So right now the house is full. My mom and my sister are living with me here. Mission accomplished. Totally intense, but there's a big relief. I feel a lot of weight off my chest knowing my family is safe and with me now.
Yeah, especially now. That's got to feel good. Also, probably some pretty good memories to make that trip over there.
I mean, yes and no, because we didn't really do a leisurely sightseeing tour across the U.S. So, Route 80 from California to Jersey is a boring straight line. And it just, you drive through beautiful states. It just happens to drive through like the shitty parts of the states. Like we went through Utah and we went through the shitty part of Utah, same thing with Wyoming. And it's just like flat desert brown for hours and hours and hours. And you're doing a ton of miles. So I wish that we could have made it a little bit more vacation-like and done stuff. But the goal was to just truck across the country as quick as possible. My buddy split the driving with me, so I'm real appreciative of that. Shout out to Jason Andrew if you're listening, man. And then we were there for 2 days. My mom's been packing; she had been packing for months prior to us getting there, so it was all prepped for the most part. But we were there for another 2 days, cleaning up the last stuff, and then the moving truck was there on a Friday. We loaded everything up in boxes, and once that left, we got on the road and headed back. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I wouldn't recommend it to most people, like moving your family via RV, but considering the circumstance of the country, it was the safest thing to do, we thought.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully you're only doing that once anyways. That kind of a transfer and move. You don't want to be doing that on the regular. I know I saw on Instagram, on the Sculpable Instagram, you are already getting knee deep into your Halloween decor prep. You want to touch a little bit on what you've been up to?
Yeah. I mean, you probably know I go all out for Halloween. I take that shit seriously. The witching hour usually starts for me like September 1st. That's when I really like put it into gear. This picture shows the milk jug skulls that I make because Jacob's 5. He still drinks a ton of milk. So I save them all year round. The milk, the empty gallon bottles. And I've got like somewhere like about 40 per year is what he averages about drinking between Halloweens. And then I take them and I melt them down over this resin cast that I have. And I make these and I fill them with foam and I paint them and I just make all kinds of like creepy shit all over the front yard, like, very 70s cannibal horror movie style. Yeah, there's a good shot. I hang out above the front door. So that's like what people greet when they come to the house, and the mailman and the Amazon delivery guy. So they know exactly like who's the weirdo in the neighborhood, right away. So
what do your neighbors think of that?
They're really supportive and really cool. They're all super into it. My one neighbor next door is a photographer, professional photographer. So she's like taking photos of my past Christmas cards with all my evil shit on it. So she's super into it. My other neighbors across the street, they wanted a tour of my studio, and they wanted to give me they wanted like tutorials of how I did stuff. I think they're just disappointed that I'm not as into Christmas as I am into Halloween. Like, I don't decorate at all. But I think I might throw them a bone and start putting up some lights. But Halloween for me is like the best time of year. I just love it. And I take it seriously. And I like to have a big, like, an art project on the front yard, not just like diarrhea of like stuff from the store. I do have some store-bought stuff, but I'll modify it, I'll edit it, I'll corpse it, I'll make it way more realistic. And I really enjoy it.
Yeah, we talking about September 1st. It's like Labor Day weekend is usually when we go and break out all our Halloween. So we get 2 months of Halloween decor, and then we got that weird space between Halloween ending and Thanksgiving where you just kind of make it a little less spooky. You leave out all the pumpkins. And then after Thanksgiving, then it's from there until like January is Christmas decorations.
So you just do your apartment, inside of your apartment?
Yeah, it's just right now, just the apartment. Do a lot of, it's like 70s, 80s horror, or not horror, but like Halloween decor. So a lot of the bestial stuff and more vintagey stuff.
Like all the plastic masks kind of thing.
Yeah, plastic masks, like the blow molded stuff.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome.
And then this year I started with like a Halloween town. It's called like Spooky Town. So I've got like all the little light up houses and whatever. Never really had like a Christmas village, but this is the Halloween version of a Christmas village. But it's really cool because it's like it lights up at night, and there's some really cool accessories out there. If you're into that thing,
you've got to buy a house just so you can like take your Halloween expression further and share it with people, driving by. I like it when people drive by and they slow the car down just to see what the hell I've done. I totally get off on that.
They're getting ready to call the police. They're not quite sure.
I hope that one day I get on the news. That's my goal.
So your son get involved as well?
Yeah, he's into it. He's definitely gotten like the art bug from me. Right now, he's not like a super athletic kid, but he's only 5. But he's definitely gravitated naturally towards arts and crafts. And, a lot of that has to do with, I have the studio in the house and he comes in and does stuff. But he always says to me, "Hey, Daddy, can we paint skulls tonight?" And I'm like, "Dude, you make me so proud, man." It's like the most metal thing ever when your kid asks you if we can paint skulls. I'm like, that's fucking awesome. I love that. So he's into
you can't ask for much more than that.
I know, my little mini me,
So let's get into things here. Before we get too far, I'll run through a brief description of the band. We are here today to worship at the altar of Tool.
The Almighty.
Tool is an American rock band from Los Angeles, California, formed in 1990. The group's lineup includes vocalist Maynard James Keenan, guitarist Adam Jones, drummer Danny Carey, and bassist Justin Chancellor. Justin's been the bassist since 1995, replacing their original bassist, Paul D'Amour. Tool has won 4 Grammy Awards, performed worldwide tours, and produced albums topping the charts in several countries. As you'll find out in today's discussion, Tool are known for heavily incorporating visual arts into their long and complex releases and marching to the beat of their own drums, as complex and unconventional and odd time signatures as they are. Tool are style transcending, psychedelic art rock trailblazers and are hailed as one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, Ken Hoffman, when did you start listening to Tool, and what are your earliest memories of the band?
It's funny. I think it's typical of my reaction to Tool, because when I first listened to Tool, I was like, they're cool, but I wasn't really into it, which I guess is sort of symbolically how I always got into their music later on, where it always took me a while to really fully appreciate it. It's always like a slow burn. But, Tool was, I think Undertow came out in like 91, and I was in high school. and it was an MTV generation. So I think my first introduction was seeing Sober on MTV, being like, you know what, this video is really cool. But at that time, music, I was still very heavily into like Big Four thrash. That was my, that was my go-to music. I was listening to a lot of Sabbath. Like I had my bands that I was into, and Tool, just that album did not hit my radar at that point, even though I thought the video was cool. And then I went to college. I graduated in 93, went to college. And in 96, my roommates, in my junior year of college, I lived with a bunch of metalheads for the first time. I had my sophomore year, I only had one metalhead roommate, and I lived with a bunch of hippies. But my junior year, I lived with a bunch of metalheads. And my roommate was into Tool. He had like the Tool with the wrench logo. And I was like, what's up with that? And that year, Anima came out. And Anima, as we know, just like changed their sound. And then I was hooked. And that was my big Tool like coming out party at that point, was college 96 when Anima was released.
Well, I'm a bit younger than you. So in 96, I believe I was in 7th grade. So for me, it was, I don't really remember the first time I heard Tool. Obviously, stuff from Undertow is on the radio. So you're just subliminally absorbing this through the rock radio station. Laser 103 in Milwaukee was the big rock station. But so when Anima hits in 1996, I mean, it was the sweet spot for me. There's, the grunge music and Metallica and all this stuff is at the height. And then you have Tool, you have Stinkfist and Anima on the radio nonstop. And
you heard that on the radio?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it was funny because like even on the radio, I distinctly remember them calling it Anima instead of Anima, which is funny. And, it just goes back to the oddness of Tool and the way they name things. And
yeah, we called it Enema. That's how I pronounced it for like probably the last 20 years was Enema.
Sure. Yeah. And then Lateralis drops in 2001. And I remember I didn't have cable growing up, but there was a channel called The Box where it was like call in requests. You would like pay 99 cents and you request them to play your music video. But then The Box was purchased by MTV and that became what is MTV2. So we got MTV2 for free, even though we didn't have cable. We got MTV2, but it was always kind of a little bit staticky. I remember them playing like the first Coldplay videos, and but along with the Coldplay video, they played Schism like every hour, like nonstop. And I still think to this day that Schism is my favorite Tool music video.
And you still have Coldplay and Tool in the same playlist then, huh? Like
yeah. It's like always wondered why they didn't tour together.
Right. So it is a good lineup. I don't
know. So when was the first time you saw Tool in concert?
That memory is fuzzy. I think it was that year they played Ozfest. I think my first intro to Tool live was at an Ozfest show because it didn't have, I don't think that, they hadn't really fully developed the stage visuals yet at that point. But it was definitely for the Anima tour because I saw them a couple times that tour. And then later on, I remember seeing them at the Garden and in Madison Square Garden. But I think the very first time was Lollapalooza. And I think that was their second Lollapalooza tour. I think they had done one very, very early on when they were kind of unknown with Rage that year, like maybe the first or second Lollapalooza ever. And then later on, they did it later on.
Yeah, I think I heard that.
Sorry, not Lollapalooza, dude. Ozfest. Sorry, man. That's what I meant.
I think on Lollapalooza, though, now that you mentioned that they
were on Lollapalooza. I did not see
They were like on the side stage, and they got bumped to main stage because they were blowing up.
Yeah.
I didn't see him until 2007. So I saw him on the 10,000 Dates tour. They were doing the visuals at that time. So my mind was just melted.
That was your first time seeing him was 10,000 Days?
Yeah, that tour. So I hadn't seen him prior. Had been listening to them that whole time, but just never saw him. So I saw him at the Marcus Amphitheater in Milwaukee, which is the big amphitheater on the lake. I went with our mutual friend, Nate, He and I went with our coworker and good friend Justin, and I think up until recently, that was like my number one concert I ever seen, just because of the visual and emotional experience of absorbing that. Like we weren't like up close, but we were in a dead center visual of like, behind the soundboard. And it's like, just, it's hard to match something like that. It just has such an impact.
I've seen Tool at this point now more than any other band that I'd ever seen. So when we try to like reminisce about those shows, they all kind of fade in, and like they all become one memory to a certain degree, unless the location was super significant. Because I saw them, a couple times at like Bill Graham in San Francisco. I saw them a couple times at venues in New York City when I was on the East Coast. I saw a couple times in the same locations. And, because they didn't have a new album for 13 years, they were somewhat playing. It was like the same tour. They were touring every year, and I would see them like toured, I would see them at least 2 nights out of that tour if I could, in sort of the next city. So I saw them so much that it all sort of blended together. And then after a while, because of that lack of new material, it all sort of merged together. But there were certainly certain shows that I remember going to see in certain, like it was either like a Halloween show or it was a, specific state and venue. Like absolutely Tool is, up there in terms of like my favorite concerts ever. And, being able to see them evolve over the years too, from a visual perspective, the incorporation of all their art in the background. And it's been, now that like they've set the bar for everybody, I think like they're the standard in terms of like who's the elite live concert band. It's Tool,
We got a little comment here from Nate Failhour. His hairstylist also does Justin Chancellor's hair when he's in town. I don't know if that's when Nate's living in Florida or when he's living in Wisconsin, but
it was just like maybe. Justin when he had hair, because like doesn't he just keep his hair like pretty closely cropped at this point?
Yeah, I don't know. We also have a Hoff machine comment from Nick Scalzi. So please, folks listening live, feel free to chime in and we can answer questions live. When you were talking about seeing a band multiple times on a tour, I think of Primus. Like I've seen Primus so many times, and the same thing. Like it's almost like you accidentally see them multiple times on the same tour, because there'll be like a gap where you don't see them, and then it just lines up when you see a band. You see a lot of concerts, I guess. They're local, and
Primus held that distinction for me too. Like up until I was about 25. Primus was the band that I had seen the most. They had surpassed Metallica. First, it was Metallica. I saw Metallica more than anybody else. And then Primus became the band that I saw more than anybody else. And then Tool, like, lapped them like 3 times by now. Like, Tool is like the band that doesn't matter. I will see them every time they come through, every time religiously. It's just that's my religion at this point now, regardless if I know that the set is going to be the same, before Fear Inoculum came out, I'm like, well, we're just going to see the 10,000 Days set again, but that's fine, because I knew that there'd be something different, at least visually. But then they started to sort of play new tracks that they hadn't played for a while. So, there was those things. It's like, oh, they hadn't played sober in 16 years. I'm like, that's cool. Let's hear that. And they started throwing in like Opiate, like the first time they played Opiate again for the first time. So, but always when they're here, I'm there.
That sound, ladies and gentlemen, means it's time for the ranking. Today, Ken and I will be ranking each of our top 5 Tool full-length studio albums. I'll run through my list, 5 through 1, followed by yours, Ken.
Right.
And then the debate and discussion shall commence, starting with our number 1s and then working backwards from there.
Okay.
So without further ado, here are our lists. None of them match up. They're all different. So
no way.
My number 5, I have Fear Inoculum. Number 4, Undertow. Number 3, Lateralis. Number 2, Anima. Number 1, 10,000 Days. And on your list, Ken, you have number 5, Undertow. Number 4, 10,000 Days. Number 3, Fear Inoculum. Number 2, Lateralis. And number 1, Anima. So let's start with your number 1, Ken, Anima.
Well, first, I'm kind of shocked at your ranking, so I'm excited to hear that. I would have guessed that you were going to come in with Lateralis number 1. And me personally, I was debating which was number 1, Anima or Lateralis. And to me, it was like, well, really, how do you even define, like, what is the ranking? Is it like when you the statement top 5 is a subjective interpretation? Is it my favorite album? Is it their best album? Is that one and the same thing by definition, or is it different? So that's kind of what I struggled with. It was very easy for me to do that when we did the Maiden podcast, because, like, to me, my favorites just happened to coincide with what I thought was their best.
Sure.
Musically, I don't think Anima is their best album in terms of, like, the talent they show, the tightness. But Anima is I ranked Anima because it was the first album that really got me into them. But like start to finish, the evolution that they took, the jump they took from Undertow to Anima is a huge, significant leap. And then the steps that they took from Anima through Fear Inoculum are there. They're not as big. Anima, to me, is their best album because, first of all, 1 and 2, like the openers, Stinkfist, and then what's track 2, dude? I'm spacing out.
Eulogy.
Eulogy, yeah. Those are the best 2 openers, like 1 and 2 tracks off of any album. So I think Lateralis starts with The Grudge, and then it goes into The Patient. I think 1 and 2 on Anima are stronger, so that's a given. The song Anima, or I always think it's Enema. I mean, they spell it differently. The song, have you ever noticed that the song is actually spelled with an E as opposed to an I, and the album is spelled with the I as opposed to the E? So Enema sort of sounds like that's the right name for that song. I just love the singability of that song live. That was a big consideration for me. Like, which of these, the songs on Anima to me are the better live tracks for Tool. And hands down, 46 and 2 is my favorite Tool song of all time. So that's all those things considered. That's kind of why I ranked Anima number 1. But Lateralis, pretty fucking close, number 2, man. And musically, they're a tighter band, so you could have ranked it, but that was my ranking for those.
Yeah, so I went with 10,000 Days. I mean, to go to my to comment on my number 2 really quick.
Yeah.
Anima, the songs Stinkfist and the song Anima are my 2 favorite Tool songs.
Yeah.
So if the rest of the album was the same as those 2 songs, that would be my number 1 pick.
Yeah.
But I think that as an overall holistic album, I felt like 10,000 Days was it's my favorite. And there's a hair difference between the number 1 and the number 5 on this list. Like,
right.
It's really hard to define. And even coming into this, I'm like, this week I was debating the 1, 2, and 3 picks. Those could have been in any order. And I've consistently thought of 10,000 Days as my favorite Tool album and the progression through the band. And I think I would have even ranked Lateralis above Anima as the band got more progressive. I fell greater in love with the band. Mm-hmm. Every album has gotten more progressive. To me, 10,000 Days is the peak of the prog rock meeting the pop rock sensibility of like a rock and roll album that you can play on the radio. That was like the peak to me. Whereas once you go to the next album, Fear Inoculum, they start to tip in favor of the progressive rock, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree that, 10,000 Days is certainly more poppy than Lateralis is, with Jambi and the Pot. I think 10,000 Days is, though, their most from Maynard's lyrics perspective, like his most personal, and I appreciate that album for that reason. I think it's like he's always been, his lyrics are always like his journey, his lyrics, his evolution of lyrics is fascinating to me, because he went from like very sort of in your face and obvious lyrics on Opiate and Undertow into, you know, a little bit more cryptic messaging. You know, what's he talking about? Double entendres. Wow. Now all of a sudden he's so cerebral. I don't even understand what the hell he's talking about. Like that evolution, I think goes through his albums. And 10,000 Days to me is a very, very personal album, especially, you know, I think that the name of the album was named after the length of time that it took for his mother to die. She had a stroke when he was 11 and was paralyzed and stayed alive for 29 years. And that's roughly 10,000 days, and died right before this album was released. And that's what this album is about. So at least in my interpretation and many fans' interpretations, of course, there's another whole spectrum that says, no, it's about this, you know, and that's one of the really cool things about Tool, is that the answer isn't obvious and he makes you kind of think about it. But I appreciate that album for that reason. However, Jambi, great song to sing to. The Pot, great song to sing to. But nothing comes down like 46 and 2. Nothing comes down like Enema Live. Like, I'm praying for rain. I'm praying for tidal waves. When the crowd, when 5,000 people are singing that together in a live environment, and the energy that's there and that shared experience, when he talks about the collective unconscious, that's that album. And Anima is the album that does that for me, man. You know? So,
well, and that's why Anima is my number 2, because of those songs. But again, as a whole, to me, but so you talked about the 1-2 punch of the start of Anima. I would say that 10,000 Days with Vicarious and Jambi rival it.
They're strong.
The breakdown in Jambi is one of my favorite moments in the concert, because it's just so heavy. Right. It's so heavy. Right. Like, and it's not like heavy in like a Meshuggah way. It's heavy in like the rhythm of that is so heavy. You know, it echoes like, why is Black Sabbath heavy? Why is Black Sabbath the heaviest band in the world, even though they're not like a death metal band?
Right.
But it's the writing. I like that Maynard's still angry and pissed off on this album. You know, he's still aggressive. He's still screaming. And I think too, a lot of progressive albums, it's hard to love them immediately. You put them on and you're like, I don't know if I get this. And then you're like, am I liking this just because I'm supposed to? Or do I not get it? And it needs to grow on you. And for some reason, this album immediately grew on me. The visuals, the tour, the everything. It was just a perfect storm for me.
Well, there was a pretty significant wait between Lateralis and 10,000 Days too. I think that was like a 5 or 6 year gap between albums. And at that time, that seemed like an eternity, because we didn't know that the next gap was going to be fucking 13 years, you know?
Exactly.
But that felt like a really long time. So you're right. The Jambi's riff, you know, as a live thing is one of the best parts of the moment of that show. And, you know, I appreciate like his lyrical sort of fluidness on The Pot. He's more like a perfect circle in that. And I really appreciate that sort of that, like it's departure from what you normally hear. But it just, you know, to me, Lateralis beats that album, because like that's, you know, fuck, man, is there a more intellectual metal album ever written than Lateralis, you know? And I think most people, well, you know, many people, I don't know, if you do a consensus of all Tool fans, my guess is that Lateralis would probably be voted number 1 album. That's what I thought. That's what I thought you were going to say. And it was sort of the sexier pick. So I'm actually surprised by your 10,000 Days, but Lateralis, I mean, Jesus.
Yeah. Let's talk about Lateralis. That's your number 2 pick.
Yeah. I mean, math nerds rejoice, you know, all of a sudden, like up until Tool came out, there was like, you know, the metal scene was like, either you were bucketed as like Satan worshiping like Neanderthals, or you were like hair bands, spandex wearing, femmes, or you were like, grungy, flannelly, stinky potheads from Seattle. You know what I mean? That was like, you were bucketed into that. And then
Yeah.
Tool comes out, breaks all the rules, and they're like, you know what? It's okay to be cerebral. It's okay to be a math nerd. It's okay to be spiritual and have some, interest in psychology and philosophy. And it's okay to love your mother. You know what I mean? It's like Tool allowed you to do all of that. And Lateralis is really sort of the pinnacle of bringing that all together. Lateralis is like the next step of, from a music perspective, Anima was a huge jump from Undertow musically, and set the sort of sound that Tool would become and embrace. That was really the album that established their sound, and that's another reason why they're number one. But Lateralis like perfected it, being able to incorporate the Fibonacci sequence into songwriting. I didn't even know what that was. I never even heard of it. I knew that there was, a sacred geometry to life. I think that if you're, aware of things, once it's explained to you, you're like, oh, I know that. I get that. I've always sort of known that, but no one ever explained it to you in a song, you know what I mean? Or buried it in a song and let you do this like Da Vinci Code uncovering of it. And when you find that stuff out and you're like, wow, band put this into the music, boom, it's like just mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, the just the driving bass of that album too. Like there was nothing like that before it. Like, and you can almost say that for all Tool albums. There was nothing like it before they created it. So, I think at this point,
it's
especially with
their magnus opus. I think really,
yeah. Well, and at that time, like it was like, this is prog rock getting played on the radio. Like that was not really a thing at that point, other than, going back to like Dream Theater and Rush and bands of the past, King Crimson, like those bands got some radio play, but those are almost like, other than Dream Theater, it's almost like those are classic rock bands. So in modern times, to have a progressive band like that, getting the radio play on, popular rock radio, pretty groundbreaking. My number 2 is Anima.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with anything you said about it being your number 1, and it could easily be my number 1. I just have a greater attachment to 10,000 Days. Again, Anima, Stinkfist and Anima are my favorite songs. So like those, both nostalgically, because for me, it's like a place and time, as well as just overall, they just rock. Like those songs are just so hard hitting and killer artwork, the lenticular.
Well, they've always pushed the envelope in everything, packaging included, the artwork that they've incorporated into all that. But I think what Anima and then Lateralis did too is their ability to take sort of like their slower tracks. And I think that, we call it prog rock. It's almost like a disservice to call it prog rock. It's not rock. It's definitely progressive metal. It's metal. I don't know why I have this like negative connotation with the word prog rock.
I would disagree.
About what? Calling it
I was going to ask you that. I would never call Tool a metal band.
You would not call Tool a metal band.
No, I don't think they're metal.
A prog rock band? You would call them?
I would call them a rock. They're definitely a hard rock band, a progressive hard rock band.
No way, dude. You can't
not
you
metal.
Can't listen to the breakdown in Zombie or the end of 46 and Tool and tell me that that's a rock band.
The metal version of Tool is Meshuggah. Like that's a metal version of their genre of music that they're playing. They're the rock version. Meshuggah's the metal
version of them. Meshuggah is on a level of heavy that most heavy bands are not. So that's not even, comparable. Like, but absolutely Tool's a metal band, dude. And I think even this goes back to like debating just what are the definitions of even metal at this point, because I had this argument with a friend of mine, like, where do you put Priest? Is Priest a metal band? You know what I mean? If you call Priest a metal band and call and say Tool is not, how can you even argue that? You know what I mean? Because Priest is nowhere near as heavy as Tool is, but Priest is like the start of metal. You know, at that time, the new wave of British heavy metal. So there's different types of it, but the chunk of Adam when Adam Jones hits it, that's just the heaviest thing that hits you ever, man. Like, just because they find the groove and the slow buildup, that's the progression, that's the progressive part of it. But to call it progressive rock, that's not a fucking rock, dude. That is metal. That is metal. That's what it is.
Agree to disagree.
Dude, I can't even.
I don't find it as an insult, because I think they're all they're all in the family. Like, and based on the fact that Tool can tour with the heaviest bands or the lightest band, they could tour with Radiohead, and they could tour with Gojira.
That's
Lamb
why
of God.
They're the perfect festival bands. That's why they're like on festivals, because they can headline that festival. That's the Coldplay. Like, Coldplay is on the other fucking stage, and then Tool's on the other one. So
yeah, my favorite thing that I've talked about that so much. Like, Primus is another great band where you see the harmony of like metalheads and hippies dancing together. They're you got the like hippie dancing, and then you got the shirtless metal bro, and they're all harmoniously coexisting by the power of these bands. It's good. It's good stuff. So let's go to your number 3, which is their latest effort, which just celebrated, I think, its 1-year anniversary already.
Is it already?
Fear Inoculum.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the weight impacted this decision. Like, 13 years later, there was a lot of pressure, I think, on them to do that. What I appreciate about that pressure is that, in typical Maynard fashion, he just brought it to the forefront and like discusses it in his songs and sings about it. I appreciate the candidness of like, this album is basically, in my interpretation, an expression of an older band, confronting that age. And me, as now an older man, which I consider, look, I'm 45, I've got a 5-year-old kid. You're faced with mortality in certain events in your life. When you have a child, when you reach 45, you know what I mean? You're like, dude, I'm past midlife at this point. If I'm lucky, if I hit 80, you know what I mean? So people are like, you're in your midlife crisis. I was like, fuck that. I was in my midlife crisis 5 years ago or 7 years ago. So I think that what I appreciate about this and why I ranked it this way is because this is Tool's acknowledgement of that maturation and that like time frame in their life. I think that this album came out and they were very like, Maynard's really good at just kind of saying F you to everybody in his songs. And, he talks about aging. He's like, are we still, this, how are we going to be judged by this? And that comes out, I think through his lyrics, and I think it's very obvious, that then, they're just in a different place in their life, and the album reflects it. Also, musically, is this Danny Carey's best album ever? Probably. Is it, better than Lateralis? Is it Justin's best bass album? Probably. Is Tempest one of, Adam Jones's? Is that his magnus opus? He might say so. Musically, I think overall Lateralis is like a tighter album and it's probably the best musically, but Fear Inoculum is their most mature and most accomplished, I think. And that's why I ranked that third above 10,000 Days.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely their most progressive album to this day.
Yeah.
And again, it's I could say it a million times. Like, any of these could be my number 1. My number 3 is Lateralis, which easily could have been my number 1 pick.
Sure.
And up until last week, I was debating. I went more with my heart of like what I've always considered for the order, like without really digging too deep into my brain and trying to debate these. It's like right off, what does my gut say is the order of this? But again, Lateralis, I mean, that the prog play on the radio, the driving bass riffs, the visuals with that album. I mean, the introduction of Alex Gray working with the band really changed things for me too. Like I got more interested in Tool once Alex Gray came into the picture because now the visuals. I know the visuals have always been a part of it, but his work with them, I think push it to the next level.
Hey, we're having some technical difficulties there, Ryan. You might want to check on that real quick.
What's occurring?
It's the same thing we were experiencing previously.
Mic problems. Is it feeding back or
it's echo?
Repeating? Is it echoing on your voice or mine?
Yours.
Turn your volume down a little bit. That'd be your mic, my voice. You're hearing me twice.
It's that same staticky reverb that we were going through in the tests. Like, pull your mic, plug it back in. Do that again.
All right, here. Let's see.
All right. That seemed to have fixed it. Yeah.
All right. Sorry, live listeners.
Yeah, you were saying a lot of comments, I think, that we need to circle back on in there. Lateralis is the introduction of Alex Gray artwork for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I am, and we can go back to our Iron Maiden podcast we do.
Yeah.
I'm such a sucker for the visual. I mean, look at the room behind me. Like, I just feed off of the visualization of having all these little nuggets of joy around me. And when it comes to bands, it's the same thing. Like, sometimes a band releases an album and the artwork to me brings the album down, even though it shouldn't. Like, there's no reason that the art should influence the sound. But I think when there's a harmony between like the visuals of Lateralis and the music video for Lateralis and the music of Lateralis, that like has a very strong magnetic pull for me.
Yeah, for a band like Tool, who's like very aware of, you know, the artistry behind what they're creating and what they're presenting, I think it's a really good point to make, that like including Alex Gray in that album cover, and then the packaging, and then taking that through the visual of like the live performance is a game changer for them. And that actually should be considered as like why this album's even better too, is because it's an even more thoughtful approach. You know what I mean? It's like Tool looks at it as like, hey, I'm putting my best foot forward to you. Like, I'm not just a band cutting an album to make money. This is an expression of who I am, what we do. Art is an expression of self. So they are so thoughtful through everything, the collaboration with the artists, you know, through everything. And even the first few albums when they did that too, but Lateralis really changed that with Alex Gray. And now that's sort of that's their visual style. And people see Alex Gray, they might know it more for Tool as opposed to Alex, even though Alex had already developed that look before he started to collaborate with Tool. So, you know, another reason why it's certainly there. You know, I love that they've taken that to like such an extreme level, to like the art direction of Adam, like, you know, almost to like sort of a, you know, it's so controlling and how detailed he gets into that. I wish more bands were capable of doing that and took it to that degree. If I was a musician, that's probably the level of control that I would want to, and the level of obsession that I would go into it as well. But, you know, to me, that's just the reason why Tool is Tool, and on the level that they are at, and not many bands are.
So at number 4, you have 10,000 Days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 10,000 Days, great album. I appreciate it for its, you know, inner reflection and its honesty. You know, like I said, I think I can relate very much to what Maynard's going through, like, you know, with his mother. My mother didn't die, but, you know, she's been struggling with bone marrow cancer for 15 years. So sort of having that hang over your head and impact your life, like I appreciate having like one of your rock gods being able to sing about it and saying, hey, it's okay to have these emotions, whereas like Slayer would never sing about their mother, you know what I mean? Unless she was like crucified somewhere. Like, it's a different type of song. And I like those bands for different types of reasons. But Tool allows you to be emotional, allows you to be sensitive, while at the same time punching right in the face. You know what I mean? And 10,000 Days does all that for me. It just does not do it the same way. Like, again, it's splitting hairs. It's like, do you like pepperoni pizza better than cheese pizza? Do you like sausage better? I'm like, today I'm going to go all of them. You know what I mean? I want all that. Just put it on mix. So it's really hard to really rank them. But when forced to, the reasons, the ones above it are there. So that just puts 10,000 Days in that spot. But that's very clear to me that's why, Undertow is 5th on my list, because musically 10,000 Days is still in line with the evolution that has happened since Undertow. But you have Undertow in 4th there. So curious as to why.
Before I get into Undertow, Dan Forelles says Eulogy highly underrated on Inema. He had also said Inema is his number 1 pick.
Yeah. Dude, Eulogy is awesome. It's funny. At first, I thought that was about Bill Hicks. That whole album was sort of, it's got a lot of sound bites from him on there. But, diving deeper into those lyrics, I think, again, there's so much interpretation you can go on that. But they're very cynical of whoever they're talking about in that song. So it's not Bill Hicks. They're a big fan of Bill Hicks.
Yeah.
So they're not crucifying him. One of the things that I read that song was about L. Ron Hubbard. They're big bashers of Scientology. So that song would make sense to me. Although you could really put any sort of like cult-like or religious zealot in that statement, and it would be sort of accurate too. They've always sort of said that about a lot of people. So that's why they're great, man. Like, they're saying a message that's very clear, but who are they saying that message to? Like, you can interpret these things a lot. Are they talking about the fans? Because Maynard's been known to Hooker with a Penis is like, he's basically like, F you guys, I did sell out. You're buying my shit. You're going to buy it, He's like, while you're whining, I'm working, like Maynard has always been very sort of, it's funny how he interacts with his fans that way. Like, he's less appreciative, I think, than any of the other band members. But he has a great way of writing stuff and you not knowing what exactly he's saying. Eulogy is another example of it.
I think I appreciate art that way, when there's art where it's open to interpretation. So even though, even Metallica, like, they have been very much a non-political band, even though they have songs that you could say, oh, this sounds like a political song, or this sounds like an anti-organized religion song. They've been very adamant about being anti-political. And what that allows is for you to, listen to that and interpret it to your own, go through your own thought process. And always appreciated that, there's a time and place for bands who have very direct messages, like Rage Against the Machine. You know what you're getting into when you listen to them. But like a band like Tool, though, I love that the art is open for interpretation. So getting back to our list, number 4 for me was Undertow. I went Undertow over Fear Inoculum because Undertow kind of starts it all for the band. I mean, obviously they had Opiate before that, but Undertow was their coming out party where they're like, yo, we're here. We're about to be the world's next biggest band. They weren't being cocky about it. They were just delivering the goods. And it's hard for me to think about, going and seeing them in concert without hearing those big songs on that album.
Yeah.
I think I would rather hear those big songs on Undertow than hear the songs on Fear Inoculum. But the gestation period right now is like only a year of of Fear Inoculum? Am I going to feel differently in another 13 years about the songs on Fear Inoculum being included in their set? Like, how dare they not include anything off of Fear Inoculum on their latest tour? But I just think that, again, if you think about the great thing about all these albums is they're all kind of slightly different. So when you see them in concert, you get a very diverse mix of songs. Fear Inoculum fills that void of those like ultra progressive musical masturbation songs where you you're just so into the drumming and the bass playing and the 4.5-minute guitar solo. Like, as a fan, you just soak it in and you absorb it.
Well, as an Uber fan, you do,
Yes,
and
exactly.
that's the thing. Fear Inoculum is really like appreciated by, I think, like the Uber fans more than anybody else. The quasi fan wants to hear Sober,
Yeah.
They don't want to hear Pneuma, and I was like when they were playing Descending, and Invincible, like first. They'd been playing snippets of Descending back on 10,000 Day tours, and that's the first time you heard it. And like, I'd be standing next to strangers and they didn't know the song, and it was super like proggy and trans like, and they would start talking and I'd be like, dude, this is new music. Would you shut the fuck up, please? You know what I mean? I've been waiting for this new music,
Yeah. Crystal and I, when we went on the latest tour, on the Fear Inoculum tour, we went to Mohegan Sun in the Mohegan Sun Arena, and we had that exact problem. I mean, the arena sold out, so we weren't sitting in maybe the best seats, but the people around us, they're in and out of their seats. They're missing half the concert. They could have cared less about any of the new material. And again, as Uber fans, we're like soaking it in. We want to hear these new songs. It made me regret the seats we ended up with. But with any band that you love a lot, you see them so many times that you get all different perspectives.
Yeah.
And I don't really think there's a bad seat in that arena. It's a smaller arena, but sometimes you get stuck in the wrong area with the wrong people. And I think a band like Tool, I've had a similar situation with Pearl Jam, where they attract this crowd that happened to be in college at the time that this band dropped, and these are like their bro bands that they just like get drunk with their bros and sing along to the radio singles. But these bands have a lot more to offer than those radio singles. So if it's anything but the radio single, people are tuning out and getting drunk and doing whatever. And I wanna hear the deep cuts. I want to experience the song that they haven't played in 10 years on tour.
Yeah. Well, when they play stuff off of Undertow or Opiate, that's when like everybody really freaks out, because that's their rawness, and like everything you say, that's why I appreciate Undertow now. But I put Undertow last and not fourth because I didn't get into that. I listened to that album and didn't get into it until Anima came out. And then Anima was so good and I was so blown away by it. But I was like, well, I have to go back and discover where they came from. How did a band get to be this good? They couldn't have been this good out of nowhere. There had to be some build up to it. So in typical Tool fashion, it took me a while to like appreciate it later on, which is like, I was having a conversation with my buddy not too long ago. He was like, dude, I just can't get into Fear Inoculum. What is going on? He's like, it just feels like an instrumental album to me with some lyrics sprinkled in there. And I was like, do this. I was like, listen to Pneuma, Invincible, and Descending. Just those 3 tracks over and over and over and over again until you get it. And then listen to the full album, and then you're going to get it. And he did. And he was like, now I fucking get it. You know what I'm saying? And that's Tool. That's Tool. Even if you're a fan of Tool, that's Tool. And that's why Undertow, there's a rawness and a directness to Undertow and Opiate. And that's why they're different albums. But to me, that's just the evolution of the band. And unfortunately, you got to rank them somewhere. So I put it there, But when I was in a cover band in my 20s, the first song I was like, we got to do Sober, So, I mean, it was on my list, you know what I mean? It's still on my list of like greatest songs ever. So,
yeah, it's just a straightforward, rockin', angry album.
It's very angry.
Nothing had really sounded like that before. And if they would have stayed on that track, they probably would have landed somewhere else. They wouldn't be an arena amphitheater selling out band. They just wouldn't be.
Maynard is he's way more aggressive and in your face up through Anima, but then Anima does start to switch, and he's like way more passive aggressive, like in the latter albums. You know, he's way more in your face in Undertow.
There was a great interview where he talks about like those early albums and how it was like it's like going to a movie. Like he's writing these lyrics and he's doing this because there's things you want to act upon, and this allows him to not get into trouble by acting out on these things that piss him off so much. It's just like watching Nightmare on Elm Street and seeing people murdered. You're watching that so that when you go to your job and people piss you off, that you don't end up slicing and dicing a few people. I had Fear Inoculum as my fifth album. Again, it's an excellent album. I don't have anything bad to say about it. It's more chill. I had a friend who was complaining about the length of the songs and how they're so chill and everything. And it's like my response was like, I guess you don't like Rush, because and I said it facetiously because he is a Rush fan. Yeah. But it's like, these guys are doing the same thing that Rush did, on their third album with these huge, long, expansive songs. And they're not for casual fans. This music isn't for, just somebody just stumbling upon this band. This is for somebody who is into Tool, has been along for the journey. And this is the next evolution of that band. I mean, even bands like Metallica has some really long songs, and that's just part of the process of evolving. And like in Justice for All, there's a lot of longer tracks because that was their more progressive album. They were trying to do something new and tell a longer story.
And when an album like Fear Inoculum doesn't translate as well to live festival scenarios, and that's why everyone's like, okay, I guess this is where I'm gonna go get a beer or go to the bathroom or whatever. In the meantime, I'm like soaking it up. I'm like dying to hear that like new track. But Fear Inoculum is the album, like if you're driving for a couple hours and you have a nice car that drives well, that has a nice system in it, dude, that's, God, man. Pneuma and into, Invincible into Descending. That's why I said to my buddy, I'm like, just listen to those 3 tracks over and over again, because that would kill, and they're so long. Like I have an hour and a half to work sometimes. That would, kill most of that ride. And dude, I'm like, that's when driving is really when I fell in love with Fear Inoculum. I was like, wow, this album, like that slow, but you're in a closed space, you're by yourself, and you're hearing the story that those musicians are telling without the lyrics. Like, Danny Carey, without a doubt, if he has never been considered the best drummer in the world, is now, now that, Neil Peart is no longer with us, it's like, I don't think that the conversation, I don't name another one, name somebody better. How often does a metal band drummer get in that kind of conversation? And this album, I think, proves that, and this is a drive album, like instrumentals, long, that's what you listen to when you're driving. And I think it's a fantastic album. It's definitely an older, more mature album. It's a mellower album, but they're a mellower band. They're older guys. That happens naturally. You're not going to have the same angst at 50 that you did at 25. It's not going to be the same. And if you try to do that, then you're not allowing your just natural maturation to come through your art. And as artists, that's what happens. You showcase and you reflect on the time frame that you're at when you're making that, when you're creating it. So,
when you talk about the drumming conversation, the names so Neil Peart, hands down, was the greatest. Rest in peace, Neil. What an incredible musician and person and author and all the other things that go with that. Immediately people turn to people like Mike Portnoy and Mike Mangini. Guess who those guys say the greatest drummer in the world is? Danny Carey of Tool. So those guys saying, endorsing him it just shows that when people are at that level and they're acknowledging. And then I would just say, listen to this album, even if you're not into this kind of progressive metal. you can't debate it. I think my favorite song on the album would be Tempest. I think that the 4.5 minute stranglehold style solo by Adam is like, as a musician, I like can't get enough of that. Like,
do you think they're Nugent fans? I think they did. I think Tool covered a Ted Nugent song at some point.
Yeah.
They did cover Stranglehold, didn't they? Yeah.
I think they may have, but
yeah.
it seems like it would be in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But I think anytime that a band can indulge itself in the process of writing music, I love it. I think that people expect them to go right, and they take that left turn into that self-indulgent realm of a 4.5 minute solo, or like the Danny Carey instrumental solo track. Like, I don't know, freaking awesome. Tool rules. That's why we're here.
Yeah, no doubt.
You know what that sound means. It's time to head into the pit. In this segment, we pit two or more things against each other in the ultimate fight to the death. In this week's Into the Pit, we have the battle for side project supremacy as A Perfect Circle and Puscifer go head to head to see who comes out victorious. Kenneth?
I like both of these bands. I think they're very different bands. For a while, I thought like A Perfect Circle was a little bit like Tool Light, sort of Maynard's softer side. And then when Puscifer came out, I listened to that. I'm like, well, this is just his weird shit, like kind of just him. He just wants to be silly and do whatever the hell he wants. They're very different stage bands, or very different live bands. But my vote is A Perfect Circle. And I would lean that way pretty heavily as well. I don't think it's much of a conversation in terms of like how close to they are. Again, I think if you polled most Tool fans, I bet you they would go this way too. I wish that I liked Puscifer a little more because I think their logo is awesome though. Like I want a shirt of that, but I feel like if I wore that shirt and I was questioned about it, I wouldn't be as honest as I would want to be. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of like a quasi Puscifer fan. Not like I am A Perfect Circle and Tool.
I had a feeling that you were going to go A Perfect Circle.
Yeah.
I also, when they debuted, I was like, oh yeah, Tool Light. Like I wanted nothing to do with it. I was like, I listened to the radio single and I'm like, I don't get it. It's like
right.
Maynard with a lesser band. Like that's what I thought at the time.
Right.
Then I go on and I actually bought the debut on cassette at Target, cassette tape, because my car, of course, at the time had a tape player. And you could get the cassette.
The early aughts.
It might have even been on clearance or something, but I remember I had that. I had like the Family Values tape, Family Values tour tape. I had a bunch of weird like tapes I had gotten at Faith No More, just a bunch of stuff, like good stuff to listen to in the car. But this was one of them, and how do you pronounce it? Mer de Noms?
Mer de Noms, yeah. Sea of Names.
Mer de Noms. I mean that's an excellent album. Like The Hollow, Jude Rose, like awesome. The band forms because Tool's taking a break. They were having some legal troubles, I believe. They had to take a break in very Tool fashion, and their guitar tech was also Maynard's roommate and also a super talented musician. I'm actually going to go with Puscifer, though.
I knew that there was the other shoe was going to drop.
I'm going with Puscifer. I mean, it's a very weird theatrical stage show. It's essentially the Maynard solo project. Like, whereas the other one's like this super group of members, even though it's kind of rotating still, Puscifer is definitely the Maynard project. What I think is odd, though, is that its debut album has a very different sound than the rest of the albums, and that's what hooked me at first, because I'm like, it's weird. It's like this. He's singing in a weird, like, low voice,
right?
And that was like the difference between A Perfect Circle was like the same style of singing but more melodic from Tool, whereas like Puscifer was like this totally different voice that he didn't really use in Tool.
I mean, I would argue that. I mean, that's why I appreciate A Perfect Circle. I think that his vocal range is very different, and you actually get to see it more in A Perfect Circle than you do in Tool.
Yeah.
Puscifer just takes it into like crazy land, though. You know what I mean? And that's what's, I think that's cool too. I just think that I appreciate sort of the, again, I go back to just like this softer, like more vulnerable state that Maynard allows himself to be in. And I think as metal musicians don't typically do that, you know, like you're not allowed to be, you know, thought provoking and sensitive if you're a metal band. And I think he shows you that you can. But, you know, Perfect Circle is that metal there. Then I would say you know, maybe that's more like a hard alternative band, not a metal band.
Now we're splitting hairs, Ken.
You know, no, there's a very big difference, dude, because Billy Howard L's guitar is nowhere near as, you know, like, is it detuned at all? I don't think so, you know, but I mean, maybe I don't know that, but it's definitely not near as heavy as Billy Howard L stuff, or Adam Jones stuff is way heavier. So I don't know. There's certainly a more vocal range in A Perfect Circle than there is in Tool, though. So
yeah, I think that it's almost like kind of actually both of these bands are a sense of what's to come with Tool in regards to Maynard. He starts pulling these things from Puscifer and A Perfect Circle into Tool.
Yeah,
as their music progresses, and he starts going more melodic. And it's more of an identity of who Maynard is, I guess.
For sure.
What I like about A Perfect Circle is like people from all of my favorite bands have been in A Perfect Circle. So you got Troy Van Leeuwen, who's currently in Queens of the Stone Age, which is my favorite band. He was also in Failure, which is one of my
wait, your favorite bands like now of all time?
All-time favorite band, Queens of the Stone Age. They're my favorite metal band, Ken.
That's like another podcast where I'll just argue that whole statement for 2 hours.
Troy's also in Failure. I mean, James Ehop from Smashing Pumpkins, Loner from Nine Inch Nails, Tim Alexander from Primus, Jordy White, aka Twiggy Ramirez from Marilyn Manson, and
that's a pretty interesting mix of superstars in that band.
And like currently, Greg Edwards from Failure is their rhythm guitarist, and keyboard player.
Mm-hmm.
I can keep going back to the Failure and I think he's also in Puscifer now. So there's like a lot of incestuous stuff with those members. But again, you get into that genre, like you were saying, it's not metal. It's like this. It's like melodic, heavy alt rock. Like It's one of my favorite styles because it's like this like dark sound but beautiful. Like it's very melodic and beautiful, but it's also got that dark tinge to it.
But all of Maynard's bands can be described like that, I think. A dark side but beautiful, right?
Yeah,
that describes Tool. Sure. That describes APC. That's definitely, I mean, the weirdness is Puscifer, though. That's like his, you know, like fetish subconscious, I think. So
Puscifer starts out really weird, and then by the time they get to like Conditions of My Parole, that's when they were like full blown melodic and beautiful and like big expansive soundscapes. And I don't know if you heard the most recent single from Puscifer, but it almost could be A Perfect Circle. Like but again, if you think about it as a solo project as opposed to the name Puscifer, think of any rock artist's solo albums. They kind of go with different genres with different albums and different things, and then they pull things from the other bands, and so that makes a lot more sense from that perspective. I picking from the two, I went from the overall catalog. If I had to go with one and get rid of the other, I think I would go with Puscifer, just because there's more variety and more. I think there's more releases. I know that. But it fills a void that a lot of other bands don't fill. So it's kind of in its own bucket of its sound. So
it's funny that you say that like it fills a void, because that's when Maynard Noms came out, there was that gap between Tool releases, and APC filled that void for me where like I needed new Maynard. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So in that time, Like the last 3 albums for Tool hadn't been released when the first Perfect Circle came out. So there was, I don't remember. It must have been, I don't know. I guess maybe it was after Perfect Circle's second release where I was like, I thought to myself for a second, do I like a Perfect Circle more than I like Tool? I actually had that thought in my head at some point, and I was like, no. But it's, it got to that point for me where, like, a Perfect Circle. My buddy and I did a road trip on our motorcycles, and we rode from, San Francisco to Portland and Seattle and back, and we saw a Perfect Circle in each of those cities, and we rode to each one on our bikes, and it was just like, it was more about, hey, let's take a road trip and get out on our bikes, but to be able to incorporate like hanging with my old buddy that I grew up with, riding motorcycles and seeing a Perfect Circle, it was like sort of some wonderful life experience and like a perfect road trip. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I also put them, above Puscifers, because I had that experience and, and cherish it. But, all those things influence what you like. But
so did you, I remember that being a really weird time when Maynard's out with a Perfect Circle. And now it seems like, well, we knew what was going to happen, and he got back with Tool and all this stuff. But I remember at the time there were a lot of questions about Tool going any further. It was all kind of up in the air. What were your memories or thoughts at that time? Did you have any doubt that Tool was coming back?
I don't know. I think that we're talking about a long time ago now. Like 20 years have passed since that's happened. Lots happened in that time. I don't think I ever felt that Tool was ever in any serious state, like that they would never come back, because I think that they recognized that their art was a pretty significant phenomenon. And aside from, like, I always felt like Maynard was the ego guy in the band, and deservedly so as the frontman and his level of intellect. Like, how could you not? But I always thought the rest of the band was, surprisingly humble and level and sort of grounded. And, that was confirmed. I actually met them later on backstage a couple of years ago. But I never really thought that by a Perfect Circle coming out, it was going to be the end of Tool. But I know that there was considerable hangups from a legal perspective. They were definitely in lawsuits with their record labels. They got into other lawsuits with an artist who did the Anima cover, and that hung them up in court for years too. And I think that put a lot of strife. So there was possibilities that those albums that they would never come out. But I don't think I ever really thought a Perfect Circle would be the reason why Tool would never have another album again. So I never really thought that. Why did you think that was going to happen?
I remember distinctly, like, them interviewing the other band members and them being like, we don't know what's going on with Maynard. I remember distinctively hearing, like, there may never be Tool again. And I think part of that was that Maynard himself didn't think that a Perfect Circle was going to blow up.
Right.
Like, they blew up off of his fame. And then also you're giving this it was like a new evolution of this entity. Like you yourself said, you got really into a Perfect Circle, and it's because it's like a new thing, and you got to consider all those other albums hadn't come out yet. So I think part of that starts to put things in question, that like, oh, this is really going well. Like, maybe they don't go back together. And I don't know. It happens a lot in the music industry, though. Like, lawsuits break bands up because it's easier to just go your separate ways.
But do you think that, like, Stone Sour would be the reason why Slipknot breaks up?
No. I mean, not now. I wouldn't think that, but right. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised at the time that Stone Sour took off, that all of a sudden Corey says, I'm done with wearing makeup and wearing masks and doing this whole thing and dealing with these 8 other guys. And
if it was announced that there was a new solo project and it was just called Maynard, then I'd be worried about Tool breaking up. You know what I mean? Typically, when a band breaks up, it's because the front man kind of goes solo. Like there's that big of a strife, and he thinks that he's big enough that he can take it on himself. Tool has always been greater than the sum of its parts, you know, because and I think finally it's getting recognized for that. Like now you're talking about Danny in a level like that he deserves to be talking in the upper echelon, you know, and Adam is recognized as being like, you know, just the amazing guitarist that he is, and Justin, same thing. It's always the pressure has always sort of been on Maynard, though. You know what I mean? And it's always like, and it always is as the front man, I think. But I always felt like these guys knew, self-aware. There's always sort of this self-deprecating, you know, behind the scenes commentary with Maynard in his lyrics and his interviews. They're notoriously difficult to sit down in a room and have conversations with. You know, they've somehow been able to maintain that level of mystery about them, even in a world of social media and information is overblown. Like everywhere you turn, it's in your face. They've still been able to sort of maintain that level of, you know, mysterious aura. And that's all very deliberate and appreciative. But because of that too, half the time, you don't know if he's joking or not. So I never felt like Tool was going to break up, because I think they always recognized that together, like these guys as artists were a pretty phenomenal force, you know, united.
All right, so, you know, and looking at Tool as a whole, the guys have dabbled in other things outside of the bands that we just talked about, A Perfect Circle and Puscifer. I mean, those are the big Maynard acts. Maynard's largely the focus of the band. Danny Carey, though, is really the only person who has had like notable side projects outside of Maynard. I think that they fly a little under the radar. But all three of them are pretty awesome bands. So you've got Volto, which is like a fusion band, and they, you know, regularly are playing around LA. They've released a few records. They do covers and original material. Listening to that, I was like really vibing off of it. I think it, you know, they could go on tour with like Mars Volta or something like that. It really showcases Danny, though.
That's Danny's just opportunity to just kind of let his freak flag fly. You know what I mean? I mean, he goes off on every song. It's just like front and center Danny Carey, you know?
Yep. Then you got Pygmy Love Circus, which was a band that he was actually in prior to join Tool full time, do Tool full time. My take on this band is like a kind of a mix. It's like a heavier Clutch.
Yeah. Clutch, totally.
Meets Guar. Like the sensibilities of Guar with the heaviness of Clutch.
Are there sensibilities? Does Guar have sensibilities?
They definitely got a defined musical style.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I mean, it's definitely got that like 90s vibe to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even newer stuff. And then, you know, I'm gonna read the description of the third band here, Legend of Siegelman, because it's a psychedelic cinematic rock supergroup featuring Danny Carey of Tool, Brent Hines of Mastodon, director Jimmy Hayward on guitar, bassist Pete Griffin from Zappa Plays Zappa and Death Clock, the lead singer David the Dr. Dreyer, synth player Chris Giovanni, and last but not least, Tim Dawson. You know, they sing about shipwrecks and giant mutant squid, and they sound exactly like what you would expect that mix of people, all 100 of them, would sound like.
I think it's typical that like Danny would be in the most side projects at this time, because he's like the most musician out of the musicians in Tool, you know, like he's the guy, like it seems to me. I mean, the other guys, they moved to LA for other reasons besides music. You know, like Adam moved there because he was going to be like a special effects artist, and Maynard was like interior design guy. But Danny moved to LA because he was a fucking rock star. You know, he knew he was going to be a drummer because that's what he wanted to do. So like these bands are very clearly like Danny needs to get that music out of him when Tool's not touring or writing. He's got to get it out. But what's weird about it for me, when I analyze it, I'm like, I know him a little bit. I don't know these bands a lot. Not like I know A Perfect Circle. And Puscifer is third in that list for me, but certainly I know them a lot more than I know these bands. And I don't really have a good reason why I never really got into it, other than that's my excuse. I have none. But it's kind of funny that I can only think of like one other drummer, and his name is Dave Lombardo, who's like, you know him as the drummer, the best, like an amazing musician in an amazing band, who has other like crazy side projects. Like, you don't typically hear of the drummer having side projects, but you do with Danny Carey, you do with Dave Lombardo.
I mean, Dave Lombardo had his own solo band, Grip Inc. Like
Grip, I love Grip. I love the first Grip album, man.
So good, so good. Yeah, I think that there's a big advantage to being like one of the world's greatest drummers, because I think it's really easy. Like, you can step into any situation and just rock it. And I mean, Portnoy has a million side projects too. Like, and the reason is because he's the backbone of whatever he's in. He can just step in. He can play anything. You talked about Danny moving out to LA to be a musician. He was playing in like the television house bands, like, that would play on commercial breaks to keep the live audience happy.
Yeah.
While we're talking about that, we may as well get into the origins of Tool. I mean, it's the late 1980s. The 4 founding members all moved to LA. Maynard's from Ohio, Danny's from Kansas, Adam, Illinois, and Paul, Washington. The glam metal scene is very big at this time. Both Paul D'Amour and Adam Jones, they want to get into the film industry. And I mean, you want to kind of pick it up from there, kind of setting that.
Yeah, from what I know, and I'm not a historian by any nature, but there's always these fun little anecdotes you find out. Like, there's pockets of creativity. It seems like there's like these art movements sometimes, and Adam Jones was in Libertyville. He grew up in Libertyville, Chicago, with Tom Morello. He went to school with Tom Morello, and Tom Morello's mom was his homeroom teacher. Like, that's crazy to me, that two dudes that would go on to basically shape the sound of like 90s and 2000s music between Rage and Tool. Like, name 2 bigger bands, than Rage and Tool in the 90s and the 2000s, and they grew up in the same town. And but Adam is, like a lot of musicians, like, talented in a lot of other things, and I think his first artist expression really came out as like a sculptor and an effects guy. And when he moved to LA, he went and worked for I'm a big horror movie nerd, and like he worked for one of the best companies out there. He worked for Stan Winston, which is like the FX house. And he worked on, like, he was doing, like, he could do kind of everything. He would make molds, he would do sculptures, he would do effects, and he did, like, Terminator 2 and Edward Scissorhands and Jurassic Park and, like, stuff like that. And working there that's how he actually met a lot of the guys who would later be involved in the artwork that did his covers and stuff, Cam DeLeon and Chet Zar and stuff like that. But when he was there, he was like, I think I want to be. He also is a guitarist, because he and Tom Morello used to sort of monkey around growing up. But he was like, I want to focus on music, and met Danny Carey, and I think Danny Carey was kind of like the established. He had like a studio in LA, and a lot of guys would go over and jam in his space. And Green Jello was like kind of the band that brought all of the members of Tool together. And that's sort of how they all kind of met, is through that weird band. Remember those guys?
Yeah, Green Jello. I mean, their big hit was 3 Little Pigs.
Yeah.
I think the funny story I heard was they kept auditioning people to join their band, Maynard and Adam's band, on drums. And the guys kept like no showing, and Danny's there because it's his studio space. So they're like, come on, jam with us, and he jams with them, and it goes really well. And then Danny's like, hey, we should do this again sometime, And then one thing leads to another. Speaking of Green Jello, they funny enough were on the Gong Show in 1987.
Dude, the Gong Show was awesome.
Yeah, and they purposely just tried to be terrible. Like,
I didn't realize that they had really ever gotten that big. They released a couple of records. They had a pretty significant following. I just remember that song, which
for sure
Maynard did the vocals for on that.
That song. I mean, they're definitely kind of in that world of Gwar as well.
Yeah,
they had that like ridiculous. Adam Jones, he actually showed them how to like make their like costumes for their stage, because they were just taking old couches and carving. So the connection though with Green Jello is Danny joins in 1989. He's in Green Jello from 89 to 94 as Danny Longlegs, and Maynard joined as a second vocalist. He was in the band from 90 to 93.
Yeah.
And then Danny Carey's doing Pygmy Love Circus. He played on a Carole King record as a studio musician. So
yeah, super talent.
We talk about the single Three Little Pigs, which was like a nonstop airplay on MTV.
Yeah, that video was. I remember that video getting a lot. Beavis and Butthead like blew that up. I remember they were big fans of that. But the Libertyville connection too. That's Maynard was dating some girl from Libertyville, and that's how she introduced him to Adam, and that's how he met him. And then he flipped Adam his tape. He was like, "You should listen to my tape. It's my demo from when I was in Michigan." He had a band called CAD or CAD. I don't know how he pronounced it, but it stood for Children of the Anachronistic Dynasty. And they actually wrote sort of the beginning of Sober in that band. And you could dig it up on YouTube. It's kind of interesting to hear Sober before it was sober, but that's how Adam met Maynard. But because of Adam and that's how they met. Maynard met Tom Morello too, and I think the rumor goes is that for a while all those guys hung out and jammed. Like Maynard was up for consideration to be the singer of Rage before he actually sung for Tool.
Yeah,
could you imagine that?
I think it worked out. Like everything landed in the right places. We got two awesome bands.
Yeah.
So,
but all that talent sort of just converges together at the same time, and I mean, what a weird time to be in LA too, because they get there and it's like the late 80s, early 90s, and the hair scene is still alive, but it's dying. And then grunge is sort of coming out of the ashes of that. So Tool comes up. I'm surprised. I mean, they could have gone in LA, who knows like which way they can go based off of where they're at. The music at the time, but they get together and like Opiate.
yeah, I mean, they're just marching straight ahead with their own sound.
Yeah.
1991 is when their demo tape comes out, so it's a 4-track recorded demo with 6 songs. When I listen to that, I hear a lot of like late 90s, early 2000s hardcore, like that kind of like post-punk, post-hardcore sound. But the difference is you don't have like the guttural screaming. You have this like melodic singing on top of it, which is like a totally different vibe. And then I think after only like 7 or 8 gigs, they got a record deal with Zoo Entertainment, which leads us to the Opiate EP.
That's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. And that was, I think that Adam was feeling that. And that's why I said to the guys at Stan Winston and like, no small job to walk away from, dude. If you're working on Terminator 2 for Stan Winston, you have talent. You clearly have talent. And he's like, I'm going to walk away from this because I really feel the urge and I feel that I have a potential to do this band thing. And they were like, you know what? You should go do it, because if it fails, you have a second career you can very clearly fall back into. That's how talented he was as an artist, the visual artist in the makeup world. So, I mean, most people are like lucky to figure out do I have one skill in life that I can
Yeah.
do? You're like, dude, I can't even cut straight lines when I do my grass in the front yard. You know what I mean? Like he can make like the most amazing rock records of all time, and then he can make like the most amazing visual effects for like the largest movies. You know, fucking some people get it all, dude. You know.
So in the process of doing Opiate, you know, they go in the studio, and I heard, you know, mixed things. I heard they kind of weren't fully confident in all their material at the time. They retrack two of the songs from the demo tape, and then they have include two live versions that were recorded in front of an audience at the Green Jello like house or studio, whatever it is. But they decide to do an EP because they think, okay, we go in there, we get out really fast, we don't do a lot of songs, it'll save us money, we'll owe less to the record label. Because as many people might not know, when you get a record deal, you go in studio, you owe all that money that they pump into that record. It's not just covered. So you recoup that on sales of your record. So they think we'll do an EP. Well, it works out for the record label because it doesn't count against their contract as a full length. So this EP is just kind of like a bonus thing for the record label, and they still owe them a full length later.
It's sort of fortuitous because, you know, I think they accepted their contract for less money with the caveat that they'd have more creative control over their albums later on. And the record companies were like, yeah, that's great. We don't have to spend a lot of money to get these guys. But then not realizing like what artistic control freaks that these like Tool would become. So whether that was, you know, thought out or just luck or just, you know, a little bit of both, I don't know. But I would think that knowing these guys, it was probably a little bit more like, hey, let's take some more money knowing. And actually, I think that they did do that deliberately because they had seen what Green Jello had gone through. Rage was already signed before them. So Tom was giving them advice about what to do so they weren't getting raped by it. So not only did they have like the talent and the luck, they had industry friends who had success in front of them that were giving them good guidance. So, you know, that's kind of like, that's the reality of like life there. Like you have to have talent, you have to have work hard, you have to have a good luck. And then you've got to have, you know, some good, clear direction sometimes from people, some advice, some good mentorships in life. Like that's a key to success that you could take, you know, package up and teach the young ones, man, you know?
I think the other big lesson to take away, and as you observe any successful people, you realize that successful people are risk takers. And they take the risk because their confidence outweighs the risk. They know that if they stick to their guns and they do the things that they're going to do, that they, you know, you can just like, you can see it radiating off of these types of people who are like, I did this, and then we did this, and we did this. And there was no debate. They knew what they were going to do and how they were going to get from A to B. When people waver is when things fall apart and don't work out, and people quit bands and this and that, and or they don't make the hard decision of picking somebody out of a band. I mean, look at where Metallica might have been if Dave would have stayed in the band. I mean, we don't know. Maybe they would have been on the same trajectory, but that takes guts on your first album to kick the lead guitarist out prior to recording. And then just get this other guy who is an awesome guitar player, but like they didn't have any albums yet.
Right.
So, I mean, on Opiate, I mean, Hush and Opiate, they sound like singles. Like you can hear what's to come. And then if you fast forward to September of 1995, that's when Paul D'Amour is leaving the band. He wants to play guitar. He came in as a guitarist, but played bass for Tool. He decides he wants to go off and play guitar. He obviously did not have that same vision that I was just mentioning about like, we're going from A to B. Like he was like, no, I want to get there faster. I want to go from A to B. I compare that very similarly to when John Rutsey left Rush. You know, they have this debut album and it's awesome and people love it. And they have this obvious future that they're going to be a successful rock band, hard rocking album. And I know that Paul was involved with the writing of Anima, but I think when Justin comes into the fold, that's like when Neil Peart comes into Rush, and the sound changes, the whole evolution changes and shifts, and who knows what would have happened if Paul would have stayed in the band. But I think it's as impactful.
Yeah, I agree that it seems to be, whether it's coincidence or not, it can't be a coincidence really if you look at it, because, like I said earlier, Anima was sort of that album that changed that sound. That rawness of Undertow was gone, and the musicianship and the polish were way more apparent on Anima, and that was sort of Justin's coming out. So it's clearly a catalyst at that point, and then all the members are like, it just kind of falls in place and clicks.
So when we talk about the members, let's take a little bit of time to actually talk about the members in Tool individually.
Mm-hmm.
These are all excellent musicians, obviously. I think that goes without saying. I think we should start it all with probably the most enigmatic member of the band, which is Maynard.
Mm-hmm.
Most polarizing figure. You want to kind of dive into that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of pressure on the front man, and I think that especially a front man who has talent and an above average intellect, and I would put him in that category. Certainly, I think he's super cerebral, and as a result of that, I think he's been criticized as having, an ego at times. He's certainly not afraid to lash out at his fans, at the media, anybody, to that sort of criticizes him, or how long it's taking for him to write, or this and that. He's always got sort of a retort. But I think that that's sort of allowed and expected. I mean, look, if you were Maynard, you'd be allowed to do that too. You know what I mean? If you have that track record, if you were, as half as accomplished as that, you'd still be allowed to have the ego. But to me, like, just, is Tool the religion? Is Maynard the religion? I always kind of joke around. I'm like, Maynard's my God. I think just because I appreciate one is sort of self-deprecating, self-awareness. Like, I think I'm self-aware. I'm very self-aware. And yeah, I've been criticized as being called, cocky before, but I think there's a very thin line between cockiness and confidence. And, he's the guy who has it. And I saw an interview with Adam when Adam said his success in life has always been because he surrounded himself with people who were driven and talented. And Maynard's that guy. Like, Maynard's the straw that stirs a drink, man. You know what I mean? And like, he's always the one to blame. He's the guy that to blame. Like, oh, Maynard's the reason why there's such a big long delay between these records. And it turns out it wasn't. You know what I mean? There's a lot of reasons why those albums delayed, not one of which was Maynard and his writing, So while that was happening, though, he was, growing grapes and starting vineyards. You know what I mean? He was starting other bands. He's like a jiu-jitsu, martial artist. He's got interests that are, above and beyond just singing. And, above everything else, I think what I find very relatable about it, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already, is that just his ability to discuss, the raw emotion that he was feeling with the death of his mother, and how she remained so devoutly religious despite all of that, and him just questioning her and questioning that and being so honest about it. I mean, what more can you want from a front man,
Yeah, I think it goes back to that, like I was saying earlier, open to interpretation. I think, me personally, I never want to take anything too seriously.
Yeah.
Like, the thing I probably joke around about the most is death, which is like to some people, it's like, that's like very serious, like to talk about death. Like, don't joke around about that. But to me, it's like, if you can't joke around about death, what can you joke around about? Like, if we accept our mortality, makes everything else in life a lot easier. And not saying that anyone should feel the same way I do about that, but when it goes back to someone like Maynard, he's got very strong opinions but at the same time, he almost mocks the fact that he's this eccentric rock star.
Totally.
Like you had mentioned the jiu-jitsu thing, like he's probably one of the first guys to start doing these things that you wouldn't typically think of a rock star as doing.
Right.
He's got his vineyard. He's just a unique individual, and the comedy of him. I mean, I know he was doing open mics early on in the band's history. He was on HBO's Mr. Show.
Yeah, he hangs out with a lot of like stand-up comedians. I think that's like his preferred, crowd of his circle of friends, because usually there's like if they're successful, there's some level of, intellect and, hard work, like all these guys can sort of relate to each other because, getting up on stage and showing your talent and your art to people is a very hard thing to do. And then being, criticized for it and then being able to stand there and do that. What I appreciate more about Maynard too is like, he makes me want to wear wigs more. Like
I've noticed that about you.
You know what I mean? Like, I wish that I could just have the balls to wear a fucking wig like that. Like, he doesn't care, man. I guess maybe it helps if you're bald, but
yeah, we should mention that, like, for those who don't know, that like a Perfect Circle, he always wears these long wigs.
Yeah.
And he's always wearing these short like mohawks and stuff like that. Sometimes he has real hair, sometimes he doesn't. Also, he's wearing all sorts of costumes in Puscifer. So
yeah.
I think the important thing to take away is like never take yourself seriously, like, and never, even as a millionaire, like there's no reason to. I mean, I don't know. He does keep that rock star mystique about him.
He does.
He's probably the least approachable of the group of band members, but that's because I think he knows. Like, he knows that if he keeps that mystery alive, it's part of the art. Like, all of this is like one giant art piece called life.
Well, I appreciate what you just said, where you don't take yourself too seriously, but he certainly takes his art seriously.
Yes.
He takes his projects seriously, whether it's making music or making wine or, but being a part of doing all of that, you have to be a good marketer. And I think that aura of mystery that he's been able to maintain is a very deliberate move on his part, very, thought out approach, and 100% right on and successful as a result.
The last thing I just wanted to note was, some of our listeners might not know that Maynard was in the military. He joined the United States Army in 1981, inspired by Bill. Actually, well, the movie came out in 1981. I'm not sure when he joined the Army. He was inspired by Bill Murray in Stripes. So his whole plan was,
that's awesome.
Join the Army, get the GI Bill so that he can make art and go to art school. So it just kind of, that right there, that little story kind of puts, if you don't know anything about Maynard, that there kind of sums it up. So let's move on to Adam Jones, the guitarist. I think he could also be called the art director of Tool.
Sure. Yeah.
Everything visual goes through Adam. I think Maynard had a lot more involvement with some of the visuals of Tool early on, but I think he's kind of taken a step back, realizing how passionate the other three guys are about the sacred geometry and the visuals and everything like that. As you had mentioned, Adam Jones, he moved out west to work on special effects. He also worked on Ghostbusters 2. He did the Freddy Krueger in the womb makeup for Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream
That's
Child.
awesome.
It's funny when you hear him in interviews talk about this, because he's like, yeah, we're on this little movie called Jurassic Park. Like, I was sculpting dinosaurs. Like, it's like somehow that all flies under the radar because he's such a big, successful musician. But he's also has a lot of talents elsewhere. Anything you want to add to that?
I mean, we talked about him at length already, just sort of an interesting cat all around. I just appreciate his artistry in every aspect, I mean, to be that level of competent in so many different, forms of expression is pretty rare and unique, and certainly very lucky to have that.
And
but talented and driven. You know what I mean? Like you got to be driven to do it too. So didn't get sort of washed away by that, you know, the fame of who he became. You know what I mean? Continues to just come out and sort of just be this, like, he's not a flashy guitarist. He just kind of stands on stage and shreds and just drops these like huge, you know, riffs on you. And he's just so like nonchalant about it, you know? So to me, it just like, it translates as just sort of this like, you know, humble self-awareness. And I love that.
Yeah, his playing style also goes along with that. Like, he definitely takes a step back and allows the bass to be equally as important, whereas many guitarists wouldn't. They want that limelight. They want to be Slash. They want to be out there in the center of the stage, just right next to Axl Rose, you know, in the limelight, rocking out. Whereas Adam he understands more the collective whole of Tool.
Yeah.
He has a very unique style, you know, not a unique style like a Tom Morello, where it's like this like gimmicky, not like, I don't know if gimmick is the way, but like a defined style that is the Tom Morello style.
Right.
Adam has his own style, but it's not as like well known because the band's music as a whole is much more well known.
Yeah.
So, you know, Adam's doing like the chiming arpeggios and all sorts of weird effects and stuff like that. I really appreciate it though, as a musician, to like hear that and especially see it played live, because when you listen, you can't always comprehend everything that is happening. Whereas you hear like a normal like 4-piece rock band, you're like, okay, I hear this, I hear this, I hear this, and this. Whereas in Tool, there's so many layers and textures. To see it performed live is very impressive.
Yeah. I don't know much about Paul D'Amour other than he left the band, you know, after 2 albums. He's a Washington State guy, came from Pacific Northwest. I thought he was a good musician. I thought that he was a guitarist who was playing, you know, guitar riffs on bass. And I think ultimately that's why he said, you know, I'd rather pursue that. And like, you know, tough luck on this guy. You know what I mean? Because you're about to, you know, I mean, shoulda, woulda, coulda, but you know, the greatest band. Does Tool become Tool with him? I don't know, you know, because it's not like he went on to another band that has where he got to like he didn't become the he's not Megadeth, you know what I mean? So, you know, would Tool be the same Tool with Paul? Probably not, because I feel like Justin takes that band to another level.
Yeah, I think Paul coming in, I mean, he played like a guitar player, aggressive pick tone.
Yeah.
I think him leaving is a tale as old as time. Like, there's so many bands where guys are just like, I've seen it in the local music scene. You got these really big, successful bands, and at the peak of the release of their first album, the guy's like, "Oh, I'm leaving, and I want to go do my acoustic project now, or I'm gonna go to school now." Not that there's anything wrong with leaving to go to school, but it's like, it seems like a lot of musicians are invested until they're at that cusp of blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
And whether I don't know if it's like pressure, or like in this instance, it's like he's like, well, I'm not doing what I want to do creatively. I'd really like to play guitar, without seeing the bigger picture of like that this could open a much bigger door to something else. But this is also just the product of age. A lot of bands before they blow up are just teenagers or in their early 20s. They're young people, and as we know, young people are thinking more about what's immediately in front of them instead of their future as a whole.
Well, I mean, give him credit, I guess, to saying, "Hey, I really want to be a guitarist, so that's what I'm gonna go do."
Yeah, I mean, he stuck to his guns to do that.
Or not, that was the right decision, you know. But
yeah, did he regret it? It's not like he left and he went and started Megadeth like Dave, and he had all this success. Exactly. What's funny is actually, right, since 2019, he's been the bass player for Ministry. So he's back to playing bass. At least he's in a big, successful band. And I mean, even when you get kicked out of a band, or in his situation, he left the band, you still have that big name of like, I used to be a member of this band, and
sure,
you're probably always going to land on your feet. At what level you
well, if
land.
he's still getting undertow royalties, you know, he might still be set for life, you know?
Yep.
So.
Yep, exactly. So Justin comes into the picture, British musician, formerly in the band Peach, which was a band that toured with Tool. he doesn't really have any side projects, but he's like been on ISIS Records and Internaut Records and a bunch of cool bands. He did the spoken word on The Valley from the 2017 Primus album, The Saturating Seven.
Oh, really?
Desaturating Seven.
But here's a fun fact about Justin. His wife is married to my buddy's cousin. Now, that means nothing to nobody.
They're practically like brothers.
Well, it means nothing to nobody. I totally get that. Except for the fact that Nick comes over one day and he goes, "Do you listen to Tool?" And I was like, "Have you been paying attention to anything that I've said to you for the last 4 years that I've known you?" Now, that's not my buddy, but that's my other buddy. That's not the one who's married to his cousin. But he said, "Yeah, my cousin's married to the bassist, Justin." I was like, "Bullshit." He's like, "No." And I'm like, "Well, they're playing in Sacramento in like 3 weeks. Get tickets, get us free tickets, get us backstage." Sure as shit, he does. He does. So that's Nick, and that's Nick to the left of me. He gets us backstage, and we hung out in the dressing room for probably about 2 hours, and they had a little spread and some beers, and it was just Danny and just Justin. We did see Adam in the hallway. He's tall. Adam's pretty tall. Danny's pretty tall too. I didn't think that I could be a bigger fanboy of Tool until I got to hang out with Danny and Justin and just bullshit with them about nothing. You know what I mean? Like, Danny and I talked about basketball. We talked about Ancient Aliens. We talked about like shitty television. We talked about everything, and then finally I was like, dude, I'm really trying hard not to fanboy out on you. I said this to him. I said, but I have to. So I said, I just want to let you know that, the music that you guys have written have, shaped my life in so many ways. And I'm so thankful for, being able to come back here and meet you and tell you that. And for you guys to be as cool as you are and so humbling, down to earth. I'm like, I didn't think that you could be any fucking cooler than you already are until I met you. And like, he just seemed like, I said that kind of both to Danny and Justin in different ways. And they were both just so genuinely like cool about it. And they were like, thank you very much. Like, I try to be calm, but it was just a really great experience. These pictures were like the pictures that they had around the dressing room. Go back to that picture where it showed the members of Tool. This is what the Golden One Center in Sacramento, where like the Kings play. This is the picture that they put up, like for the staff to identify.
I think you could have passed for Justin.
That's what I said. I'm like, that's the picture they. That's what I was gonna say. That's the picture they chose of Justin. I'm like, that's the word. Like, it's just like a black and white dude in shadow. You can't even tell who that is. That's like half the crowd.
So we've already gushed about Danny.
Yeah.
I don't know what else there is to say. But he's got, just everything that his style, odd time signatures, the polyrhythms, the diversity of his sound. You can definitely hear jazz in what he's playing. Yeah. I feel like Volto is almost like practice for Tool. Like, he goes over there and he does all this wild stuff so that he sharpens his chops for when he gets in the studio with Tool and gets on tour and stuff. What a great progression from the demo to Opiate to Fear Inoculum.
Without a doubt, like, his evolution is like more obvious, I think, than anybody else's in that band, really, in terms of musicianship. And that's why I think Fear Inoculum is his best album in terms of like what he does like as an individual on that album. And maybe that's kind of a reason why Fear Inoculum is a little bit lower on the list too. But still up there, I think. Individually, like the individual components, like it's maybe Justin's best bass parts, Danny's best drum parts. Together are the songs super long and proggy, yeah. But as individual components, like that's clearly like he has evolved to this like elite level at that album. But fun fact about him, he carries like a huge full like case, all his jerseys that he wears, and he's always wearing a jersey when he plays one. He brings all of them with him when he's on tour, and opened it up and showed me. He had like 40 different jerseys.
Wow.
And yeah, because he's going from show to show, city to city, so he brings his collection. Not always, but sometimes he'll wear the jersey of the city he's playing in, but not always. But like he gets them, he collects them, he trades with people. Like it's a big deal to him, dude, and he's super, super proud of it. So if you ever get a chance to meet him and want to see him like open up to you, that's your key to conversation. Like talk to him about basketball, talk to him about his jerseys, and dude, you'll just get him going, and then you can't shut him up.
Well, and again, I think that's the great thing about a lot of bands when you realize that, like, as fans, they're like, okay, well, I'm into metal, so I'm not into basketball.
Right.
And then you realize when you start talking to these bands, their interest, it's like Iron Maiden and golf and all the other things that those guys are into. Like, it's so outside of the realm of heavy metal.
Yeah.
And like, Tool is one of those bands with the jiu-jitsu and the basketball and all the other random hobbies. You realize that they're just like us. They're just normal dudes that just happen to be like the world's best musicians. But
and they're into the occult and sacred geometry and mathematics and such cerebral levels of intelligence that mere mortal man can't understand.
Yeah, Danny, he stated that when he's playing to an odd time signature, he really just tries to like play to the feel of it.
Yeah.
To feel the inner pulse of the time signature instead of counting it out. So it's all like this vibe thing to him. And he's laid claim to like multiple different styles of drumming, but he drums to like sacred geometric patterns, including the unicursal hexagram. And so, to the average person, that means nothing. What you hear is a defined sound. You hear the style he's playing, and you go, "Oh, that's Danny Carey. That's Tool."
Yeah.
But for him, it's almost like an occult ritual. Like he's actually doing something in a specific manner, which then generates that sound.
Well, it's certainly like it's on a level I think that most people don't comprehend. But for them, I think I think for Danny, it's a conscious and unconscious decision that comes to him. Like, I think from what I understand, he's one of the ringleaders of the band when it comes to like sort of that interest and knowledge of all these weird subjects, although all of them seem to be into it. But for them to be able to take it and translate it into like a musical expression, like we talked about earlier, taking the Fibonacci sequence and writing, having your timing match it and then have the cadence of the lyrics match it. Maynard thought that was sort of a real, juvenile tactic. He's like, yeah, I could do better. But the fact that, Adam and Danny were able to recognize that that's what they were writing and then, sort of complete that story, it's pretty impressive, man. So it's one thing to execute it, but it has to start with the knowledge of it too. So having such deep, interests and understanding of, all the topics that they're into and making that a part of your art, whether it's the lyrics or the music or the idea that it could be where fans make up stories about it, whether it's true or not, because it just sort of fits, is a pretty cool thing. And that's the thing I think is really fascinating about Tool and their fans. They're so into it. They analyze every single word. They analyze every single beat. And it's like, well, this must mean this because this happens. This cadence, there's 3 beats here and and I sneezed 3 times today. So they must have, it's kind of like so much is analyzed. You don't know what's true, what's not. Some of it's true. And that's what just makes, I think, Tool unique and interesting than just sort of the regular rock bands.
Yeah, I think the key word I use is parameters. They set unique parameters for their playing. So like on Fear Inoculum, they're playing 7, 11, 19, 21. There's a bunch of songs in 7 specifically on Fear Inoculum. There's 7 songs on the album. The song Tempest has 7 written in name. On the song Fear Inoculum, Danny's playing 4/4 with his hands, but he's playing 21 with his feet. So there's just like odd situations where like Adam comes in with a song that he wants to record, or they're coming in with writing. He brings in ideas. He's playing a riff. Now Danny's playing these weird off-tempo time signatures, which then transforms Adam's initial idea. And then when they notice that these things are corresponding, like Lateralis, the song changes from 9/8 to 8/8 to 7/8, which is the 16th number in the Fibonacci sequence. So like they start seeing patterns and then setting parameters based around that. Like, oh, because of that, now Maynard's going to write his lyrical pattern to that, and then we're going to figure out our chord progressions based on the Fibonacci sequence. And as musicians know, this is like not easy. Like this is hard work. But the cool thing is that Tool makes it all very digestible. It's not just listening to a band with musical masturbation who are just playing all these crazy wild riffs, drum patterns just for the sake of playing. There's an aspect of that where they create these challenges for themselves, but they're doing it in a way that you go to the concert and you can still rock out. So it's an odd, it's all weird and odd patterned until it gets to that breakdown in Jambi,
Well, I mean, that's why they're elite. You'd never have this conversation like discussing like, look what the cat dragged in. You know what I mean? Like,
you never had that discussion?
No, I didn't. I don't think so. I mean, but I've never really analyzed it. Like, are Poison fans as into it as Tool fans are? I don't know.
Maybe talk to Failauer. I mean,
I know
Nate's a huge Poison fan.
I know that might have been an inadvertent dig at Nate. I don't know.
There's actually very secret occult themes to that record. So,
I'm sure.
So I mean, to drop a little bit of knowledge, we keep talking about this Fibonacci sequence. Basically, the Fibonacci sequence is a mathematical sequence that starts from 1, and then the next number is 1, and the next number being 2 creates 2 plus 1, which is 3, continuing in that mathematical progression, which is used for their chord progression on the song. Tool uses the heptagram, which you see hanging above their stage setup. It's the self-intersecting 7-sided polygon, 7-pointed star. That has connotations in multiple different religions. In Christianity, it symbolizes the 7 days of creation. It's used in Kabbalist Judaism, as well as symbolizing the first 7 verses in the Quran, in Islam. And there's mystical attributes to that shape. And Tool, for the Tool Army, which is like their fan group, they use an open heptagram, which symbolizes an open invitation to the collective unconsciousness, which all sounds very Tool.
It does. And but I think it's genuine. Whereas like, Motley Crue would have pentagrams on their, album art because it was a gimmick, because it sold records, because it was deliberately trying to elicit a response for marketing. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but what I'm saying about Tool is they don't do that for that reason. You know what I mean? I think Tool has a genuine interest and a general understanding of it. They're in tune with sort of the rhythm of life. You know what I mean? It comes back to that sacred geometry where it's like, there's a repetition and a pattern to everything in this world. You know what I mean? Whether it's, a seashell or a pine cone or the petals in a flower, there's math and there's geometry to that. And they can figure out a way to, incorporate that into their art. It certainly comes in their collaboration with their artwork when they teamed up with Alex Gray. It becomes very, very apparent. And, a lot of that too becomes a little bit more aware once you kind of like dabble into the psychedelic a little bit. And they do that. And I think that maybe had shifted in later in the album as maybe that was something they started to explore a little bit, and that potentially why they became a little bit more introspective later on in their albums and a little less raw and a little less in your face, but certainly influenced the artwork later on too. And it comes, very clear once they collaborate with Alex Gray later on.
I think when we start talking about art with Tool, I think we have to start from the top, which is with Adam Jones.
Yeah.
We had already mentioned, talking about his special effects work, which then carries over into the Tool album artwork and the Tool videos. He collaborated with a lot of artists that were from that special effects world. And I think for those artists, it's like a really cool opportunity to have this friend in a band where you get to kind of step outside of, it's funny because to us, it probably sounds really fun to work on movies. But when you're working on movies, it probably sounds really fun to get involved with musicians.
Yeah. But he did all, like the opiate cover was a sculpture that he did. The undertow rib cage, that was a sculpture that he did. So, very, very, very involved early on from the art direction of like what the visual presence of the band is going to be. This is artwork from Schism, I believe, which is off of Anima. Or this is Stinkfest. This is Stinkfest.
No, this is Schism off of Lateralis.
Oh, this is Schism off Lateralis. Yeah.
He partnered with Chet Zar on this, so he did the makeup. I think Chet did a lot of the sculpture work involved with this.
Chet was a dude. Chet was a dude that used to work with him in one of those FX houses too. I don't know if it was Stan Winston or if it was like Creature Shop or something.
I think the key is like there's just so much collaboration. Like Tool as a whole isn't just the guys in Tool. It's the partnership of working with artists.
Well, that's the thing. I've worked a lot in the LA area. I live in NorCal, so from work perspective, I've been down there a lot. Considered moving down there on more than one occasion, but I couldn't really do LA. To me, LA is like just not a place I'd want to live. But there is absolutely no denying the creative hub that Los Angeles is. There's just, it's the center of the music industry. It's the center of the Hollywood, movie machine. And the artists who are looking to become a name in whatever field they're interested in go to LA. So Adam goes and does that for movies, decides to try to make it big in music and then collaborates with the guys that he met in on all those FX studios. So, I'm not sure if it's pronounced DeLeon or DeLeon, but Cam DeLeon was one of those guys that he worked with, and he developed the wrench Tool logo. He did the Anima cover. One of my favorite pieces is he did the Oracle orifice. Is that what it's called? That's that eye with the two pupils in it. That's just badass. He also did the Salival cover as well. And a guy that he worked with, in at the FX studio. So
I was going to add Cam was a digital illustrator for the movies, and he worked on Ghostbusters. He worked on Hook, The Sum of All Fears, and the really creepy Cat in the Hat movie.
Unfortunately, I think that there was some disagreements about, the licensing, or not the licensing, but like the intellectual property of the Anima artwork, because I think Cam sued him, for the distribution of that artwork. And that was one of the reasons why, it took so long for those albums to get out from what I've read. One of many lawsuits that happened with Tool, but, I've not seen a whole lot from Cam since then. Back in the early days of Tool, there's also the early days of the internet, and Cam had I was because of Tool, I was interested in his art. I actually have one of his little mini sculptures. He still has like the same antiquated Flash website. It hasn't been updated in like a decade, so I don't know what the dude's been up to since then, but. Certainly a super talent that created the first visual presence of Tool, because when my buddy was into Tool and Undertow was out, he had that Tool shirt with the wrench logo, and I was like, maybe I need to listen to them because that's fucking funny and that's cool. That logo I think is great. I love the wrench dick logo. I think it is fantastic band icon. And I was like, maybe there's something funny about this band. I got to start paying attention a little bit more. And then Anima came out and I was like, okay, no, man. Yeah, these guys, Osseous Labyrinth, they're just like a dance troupe, a two-piece. They did the weird schism. They're like those weird creatures that walk out and schism and do that kind of like head bob and that they're bent over. And they toured with them. I actually saw these guys a couple shows. They came out on stage for that song and just kind of walk around the stage. They did it. They definitely did it at the Garden. I don't know if they did it at Ozfest, but I know I remember seeing them. I like that Tool's just able to appreciate different art forms and incorporate it into their, repertoire of stuff that they use. I don't know how they were ever introduced to each other, but, being able to say that's the kind of weird shit that I want to put in my video. And, then they come in and then a guy like Chet Zar paints him up and, does sort of the creature design over them, and Adam art directs the whole thing and says, no, we're not there yet. This is what I want to make. And having all the collaboration of like super talented people, that's like, just another great aspect of Tool.
What I appreciate about Tool is that they didn't go the like load reload route that Metallica did when they were like, we need to do something totally different. We need to change it. What Tool does is they go, we need to do something totally different. Let's bring in performance dancers. Let's bring in digital artists. Like they're always shifting the artistic and expanding their artistic reach, looking to do new and different styles. Yet every artist that they work with is distinctively Tool, And if it isn't the Tool aesthetic, it becomes part of the Tool aesthetic. There's we're looking at some images of Chet Zar's digital artwork for the what video is this?
Vicarious,
which I believe he directed the bulk of the video, and then Alex Gray actually directed the last 1 minute.
Dude, when you have Chet Zar and Alex Gray creating monsters and visuals for your video, you know that you're like the biggest band in the world, because both of those artists are like super crazy talented guys. Chet's really cool too. I've met him a couple times. I met him. He had his own Death Ego Trip was one of his one of his gallery events where he was putting out a show. Yeah, I got those DVDs there, and he produced a movie which is like his autobiography. I Like to Paint Monsters.
Excellent.
Yeah, super chill, humbling guy. I was in LA. He had an opening for all of the art that came out for that show, and he was, an impressive guy, just down to earth. And then I met him again a second time at Monsterpalooza. He's just a guy who's out there hustling his art, committed to his craft, which all these dudes are, and his thing, he paints monsters. Hence, his movie, I Like to Paint Monsters. He's been doing it as a little kid. He's dedicated to it, and he paints them so well that, Hollywood hired him, and then he said, you know what, I'm going to go and do it on my own as a living. And then Tool's like, well, hey, why don't you paint monsters for our videos? And then subsequently that becomes like a huge part of their live tour. So
yeah, I think that he got, especially once they went into the digital world, I think he got kind of disenfranchised with the special effects world. And I know Clive Barker, a good friend of his, had recommended like, hey, you're really good at painting. You should just do this full time. And I'm sure it sounds like a risky proposition at the time of like leaving this successful special effects. But clearly it's working for him, and he still gets to dabble in the special effects because he can still collaborate with Tool in their videos and stuff like that. So I don't think that door is closed for him to do that kind of stuff, but he's definitely full-time moved into being his own artist, doing his own thing, painting monsters.
And still gets hired by, cool Tool and cool bands to make, the most badass concert posters. So, but also just like an approachable guy, down to earth.
he did the special effects for Hellboy and Hellboy 2 for
Nice.
Guillermo del Toro. And what I thought was really cool in watching the documentary is one of the monster creatures that he had to create for Hellboy. Guillermo says he just has to have a mechanical mouth. You make the guy look whatever you want him to look like. And it's funny because he actually looks kind of like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a very Chet Zar character.
He's got a style, a recognizable style, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So around the time of Lateralis, Adam Jones hits up one of his favorite artists, Alex Gray, who's already like a world-renowned psychedelic artist. And he proposes this concept for the Lateralis album art. And I had kind of touched on this on my top 5, but like that partnership that happens when they join forces really sets the scene for all of the things to come.
Yeah. I mean, Alex's artwork has always been representative of like that soul existence, that like spirituality, and that sort of lives within you, which is why a lot of his artwork has like, muscle and nerves and, sort of that medical look to it. But a lot of his stuff very specifically has that sacred geometry, and he accredits that vision. Like he said that all the paintings that he's done, he has seen them through DMT, ayahuasca, psychedelic hallucinations. So that is a very, very strong, very powerful psychedelic, like nothing else that you'd ever experience. And if you've ever done that, it does show you a world sort of below the surface, which the best way that I can describe it is that like it will kind of bring a pattern of geometry over things. And really like Alex Gray's ability to paint it is probably something that you can only, like if you tried to articulate it, you wouldn't be able to until you said it's exactly like an Alex Gray painting, because there is sort of this like digital cartoon effect, but there's also this sort of like space wormhole thing that's happening too. So what's amazing about Alex is that not only is he able to have these visions, but he's able to replicate it and express it in a painting. And it's super in tune with what Tool was, trying to say and sing about and express in their music and their art. So that collaboration was, kind of an easy thing to happen. I think the Lateralis collaboration, like they commissioned him specifically, and he developed all the artwork for Lateralis specifically for that packaging. But when he did 10,000 Days, I think 10,000 Days, Adam gave him the idea, I want this, and he was doing some sketching and concepting, and couldn't quite do it. And then Alex was like, why don't I just show you what I'm already working on my own project, and that's this one, the net of being, and that's what came out to be. He's like, that's it, that's 10,000 Days. So what a unique and fascinating collaboration to have like just such super talented artists being able to do projects together like that.
I think, something that I want to mention too, because a lot of my friends who know me, I'm straight edge. So I've never done drugs, don't drink, but I love this psychedelic art. I like a lot of psychedelic bands. As you know, I love Mastodon, Meshuggah, High on Fire, very into the desert rock scene, bands like Caius and Queens of the Stone Age and Brent Bjork. The big thing is the art aspect of this. So while I've never done ayahuasca or DMT, the expression that comes through these massive paintings that Alex does in his studio, it's just, as an artist, it blows my mind. And to be able to travel and take that journey, for me, is like just very impactful.
And the paintings are huge. So before I moved to California, I grew up in Jersey. I was on the East Coast, and Alex had his studio on 27th Street on the West Side Highway before he built Cosm out in New York State. Now he's got like a whole, huge plot of land where his Cosm, his sacred place is, where his art showcase is. But before that, it was like a regular studio space in Manhattan. And I was able to go and see it a couple times. The first time was just like I think it was just a regular gallery opening where you went in there and looked at his paintings, and like all the transfiguration paintings, and they're like enormous. They're like 10 feet tall, and to be able to go up close and just kind of see the vibrance of the color and the texture of the painting is really that's the best part about art, and especially art like this. Like this is impressive on your computer screen. It's way more impressive in real life. And then the second time that I got to see him in the studio was that he had a listening party when 10,000 Days was released. So my buddy and I went there, and with a ton of other like Tool Uber nerds, and listened to the album, talked to Alex, talked to his wife, Allison, and got to listen to him talk about the collaboration with Adam in particular, and Tool in general, about really what that creative process was like. And in the meantime, getting to see all this artwork, all this new artwork that he had done. It's really, really inspiring to be around like artists of that talent level and being able to talk to them. And it's great that, people like this can do it ego free and, graciously listen to your questions for the thousandth time. I'm sure they heard the same thing. But, just taking it in stride and just kind of letting the everyday Tool fan geek out with them. Really, really neat experience.
So the translation of that massive painting comes down to this album cover here. The cool thing about Tool, again, pushing the boundaries and really investing in their product, making it so that people still want to buy physical releases. They had stereoscopic glasses, which in turn made that painting 3D.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool. I mean, is it a little gimmicky? Yeah, but I think it's pretty badass. I mean, no one's ever done anything like that I've known of,
So we're going to take a quick look here. I've got a video of a virtual unboxing of my copy of the new Fear Inoculum album, which similarly to the 10,000 Days, they took it even a step further. So cue this up. So, taking a, first there's a decal on there. So once you remove that, there's actually no logo on the cover.
What did you do? You ordered this from their site directly?
Correct. So it was like a limited edition, expanded, super duper version of the album.
Didn't it sell out like in a day?
Yeah, it sold out in a day, and then they did like another secondary release of it. I don't know if the version was different. They've got some cool spot varnish.
Is this the first? Did you get it on the first day or the second release?
The first release.
Yeah.
Some foil stamping.
I did not get this, dude, because this is when they released everything on Spotify. So this is like the only fucking album I don't have.
I just opened it. I've never played the CD that's in it. I mean, I got it specifically for the collectability of it. Collect and destroy and all.
I don't even have my CD player hooked up anymore.
Yeah, I would have to put this in a computer. Or I guess I could put it in my PlayStation.
Yeah, you can put it in your Blu-ray, I guess. I
So
do have my VHS hooked up, though, but not my CD.
There's a USB cord to charge the battery on the LCD. But once you open that up, the video auto plays on the LCD there and plays like this ambient song.
So it auto plays as soon as you open it. You don't have to pull out a strip or anything to get it to go.
Correct. And I mean, from our experience in our professional jobs, we know about like quoting this kind of stuff of the spot varnishes and the unique materials. You can see the reflection of the light, of the subtle patterning. So this
is all Alex Gray's artwork, though.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this album is the first album that they ever published their lyrics in.
I believe there's not lyrics, but they released the lyrics, like digitally.
There's no lyrics in that book on the left?
I don't know. It's a good question. I thought you meant the like original album, like the actual album.
So the
Correct. You
CD's
are correct.
covered with eyes. Yeah, the CD's covered with eyes. Alex always says that like he interprets. He always paints eyes and flames as the icon of the soul.
Yeah, the artwork is just beautiful. The colors, especially with like the very like subdued blue color cover, all of the pops of color just really pop off of the artwork.
And assumably that video dynamic. Although I did see them, their first show, they played Aftershock in Sacramento here, and that was the first time that they had toured when the new album, after the new album was released. But it wasn't the Fear Inoculum tour; it hadn't started yet. So I got to hear Fear Inoculum before anybody else did. But I didn't get to see the new Fear Inoculum tour with any of the new artwork in it.
Here, I'm gonna play the second part of the video. You're gonna unmute. Need to unmute.
All right.
So again, you've got some cool spot varnish on that art of the skeleton.
That's a cool picture.
You can kind of hear the music in the background. It's very chill, like ambient sounds with very psychedelic art playing in the video. That all corresponds to the album.
Would they hit you up for this price on this piece?
What's that?
What was the price on this piece?
Oh, I don't remember. Maybe like $45. So you were saying that you saw them play some of this or all of this at Aftershock?
No, well, I didn't see Fear Inoculum. The tour, the Fear Inoculum tour, started after like their festival route. So when Fear Inoculum was released, the first show that Tool played was Aftershock in Sacramento. So I got to see them play their new songs. They played Fear Inoculum, they played Pneuma, Invincible, and Descending. That's what they played off the new album. Not in that order, though. But I didn't get to see the Fear Inoculum tour. So they did have some of this new visual on their stage setup, but it was also a lot of the older stuff, too. So I don't know if what they're playing on this video, because I also didn't see this video at the time, is what I assume they would use as part of their visual for their live tour.
I really like the promo photos for this album.
Yeah.
As well as the like vellum overlays with gold printing, foil stamping. But it's just like a very beautiful piece to page through, and like you said, there are all the lyrics.
Yeah, all the lyrics. I think this is the first time, like, Maynard has always very deliberately not printed lyrics because I think he always wanted you to kind of figure it out for yourself.
Correct. And when they released the album like digitally and on the regular album release, there were no lyrics. So that they had released them digitally to the public. But it wasn't until this version that they actually printed the lyrics in the booklet.
It's a pretty big insert.
Yeah, it's definitely a book.
Yeah.
Like a bound small book.
And does the video just loop, or does it shut off after a while?
It loops. I think there's like an 8-minute loop.
Uh-huh.
This art's pretty cool here, how this overlay.
Yeah. It's typical sort of the layering that Alex Gray does. He you know what I mean? Like as you go deeper into your self-consciousness is like he peels another layer of the artwork back. You know what I mean? It's like the skin, there's the top layer of the skin, and then below that this muscle, and then there's the nerves, and then there's like the skeleton. It's like sort of the same sort of cadence and rhythm that he's continuously doing.
Yep. So again, their releases are pretty cool. When they did the re-release of Opiate, the special edition limited release, you could actually use the stereoscopic glasses from 10,000 Days. They gave you art with the opiate re-release, so you could see 3D things in the opiate release.
That's
so
cool.
It kind of all ties back together. So let's touch a little bit on the actual concert experience of seeing Tool. We've both seen Tool a bunch of times, but interestingly enough, you and I have seen Tool together twice. We take an annual concert trip for the last, I don't know how many years, except this year, obviously. We were going to try to see Rage Against the Machine out south in the Southwest, but the pandemic kind of knocked out any chances of that tour. So I don't know what 2021 brings. Maybe we'll do something cool, but we generally try to do a destination concert of something unique. You want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think that we've seen Tool a couple of times because it's sort of a gimme. Like, we know we're going to have a good show. We know. So then you get to pick a cool venue. Where we see him in Arizona on Halloween. We saw him at Chicago when the Prodigy was supposed to play with him before, his unfortunate suicide, and with Systems reunion. So, the good thing about Tool is just consistency. They're going to put an extreme effort into the product that they're putting out, not just their live music, but the quality of the video that's going to be behind it too. So it's really an easy choice to say, where are they playing? Let's go see it. Like, I want to see them in Red Rocks. Like, I've never been out there. So I think that's like sort of a bucket list for me. I think that would be like the best band in the best venue. So, but I think Tool is a band that you could take somebody who's never listened to Tool. Like, let me take you to the show before you even listen to anything so that you can experience him. And then that would be enough to convert them to somebody to be like, I like this band. That's how powerful their live concerts are. Like, I would take Tiffany to that, even though, I mean, she's actually listened to Tool now, but I'm like, I think you would like this experience because, the collective unconscious of that crowd. Like, I love when everybody is singing together. Like, Tool is one of those bands where like everybody knows their music, and the impact of that visual and the power of the musicianship and the tightness of the band and the talent of everybody. It's A+ every time, like guaranteed A+ every time.
Yeah, I think like you said, our choices of the times that you and I traveled to see Tool, even though we had seen them before. The first time was like, you want to see Tool in the middle of the desert with Primus on Halloween? It's like, okay, I think that's like the perfect combination.
Right.
And obviously when we saw him in Chicago, it was with System and Prodigy. And that was also a no-brainer. It's like, oh, wow, well, we know Tool's going to be awesome. They were right on the cusp of the new album, so we knew they were going to be playing new material.
Yeah.
When we saw them on Halloween too, that was kind of a special show. They did No Quarter by Led Zeppelin.
It did New Quarter. Yeah, they were dressed up like Led Zeppelin, I think.
Came out in costumes.
Maynard and his wigs, dude. He just likes to wear wigs.
Yeah, I like, when I think of the Tool experience, I think of a mind-blowing concert, the mind-blowing visuals. I think of Maynard doing his little Maynard dance in the background. Their setup is unique because Maynard is lined up with Danny in the back of the stage. So you don't have your front man all Scott Stapping it out in front. You got this guy, he recognizes you, push him to the back. He's next to Danny. And then Justin and Adam, they kind of play to the sides of the stage too. So there's really nobody in the front of the stage, which allows the visuals to speak for themselves. And I know Maynard as well had made comments that they'd made comments that they try to allow dark spaces on the stage so that Maynard can really get into the feeling of the songs that he is performing.
Mm-hmm.
To get into that emotional state, it helps to not have a spotlight on him.
It works. It totally works for like his personality and sort of that aura of mystery that we talked about. He's just back. He's got that weird like Maynard jive gait that he does, and it's just so very distinct. that's why, you know, very clearly I never get sick of going and seeing them in concert. And I don't know how many times I've seen them, like 40 times. I don't even know. 30
Not
times.
not comparable musically, but like you think about like Iron Maiden, you see them live, you're waiting for the Trooper to play where he comes out with the big Union Jack, and you expect certain visuals for certain songs. And I think the same thing with Tool. There's certain things like when they play Schism, they use a lot of clips from the video.
Mm-hmm.
You have certain expectations, and even like with the new song Descending, that had like a huge impact on me right away, like because I had seen them play this a few times live before and around the time the album comes out.
Mm-hmm.
What a cool visual that if you've seen it once, you can't wait until you see it again.
And, you know, they also got the budget to do cool stuff too. They're a huge band, so they've got the huge setup. What's always funny is like when you go and see them in a smaller venue and then they try to incorporate all their shit into a tiny area, and then it's like their visuals take up like the entire back of the venue. Then it's kind of even more impressive. They're always like on the festival tour. It seems like they're a perfect festival band. We talked about that earlier because of sort of the weirdness of the prog where they kind of float between heavy and not so heavy, but so they can play those huge events because they have the setups to do it. But I do like it when they take all that stuff and they cram it into a smaller venue where there's a smaller crowd, general admission. I love Tool general admission. I love to be on the floor because it's not really like it kind of gets a little moshy occasionally, but typically not. You know, like the heaviness, it's like you know, it's more like you kind of stand and jam kind of place. Which, you know, I like to have those every now and then because I'm getting older. But I just appreciate like being in that crowd, not have to worry about, you know, some guys, you know, flying sidekick, being able to sing along, being able to experience that whole, you know, audio and visual, you know, dynamo that's happening around you. There's just nothing like it.
Great outdoor band too to see.
Yeah.
Outdoors. You know,
Yeah, I mean, because like I said, they have the huge setup. They're capable of doing it.
Yeah, have the breeze and just because there's something they're magical in the air when they're playing already. On the latest tour, they did something very cool where they had like see-through curtains that were in front of the band during the first like 4 songs, so they were able to actually project images in front of the band members. So you have all these graphics behind the stage, you have graphics in front of the stage.
That's cool.
And then, you know, you hit a high point in one of the songs and the curtains unveil.
It's just another example of like that layering that they do in their artwork. It's in the packaging. It's in the, you know, the time signatures. It's in like, it's just that repetition, that pattern, that math. It just shows up in so many different ways.
So is it worth the wait, Ken? Is it the time between tours, the time between appearances, the time between albums, 13 years to wait for a new album? Is it worth the wait to you?
It's painful for sure. Was I vindicated? Yes. So is it worth the wait? Yes. Honestly, did I say to myself, I'm not going to go see them again because it's just going to be the same set list that I've seen, you know, for the last 5 years. Did I say that for the last 5 years? Yeah, I did. Did I go see them when they came back again? Yeah, I did. You know, because it still makes me feel good when I go and see them. So is it worth the wait? Of course it's worth the wait. New material from the greatest band ever. Yeah, it's worth the wait, man. And for them to come out with Fear Inoculum, it wasn't like it was a schlocky throwaway, like, hey, let's put this together. You know, arguably it's like some of the best music that they wrote. You know what I mean? Does it fall into the top? No, because we've determined that our answers have other factors that give us those reasons. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
is it Danny's best album? Yeah, maybe. You know what I mean? Is he at the pinnacle of his drumming career? Maybe. You know, so it's worth the wait. Are Maynard's lyrics like as impressive as ever? Yeah. You know, when he's capable of like taking 2 words, you know, like He's below aloud. You're like, oh, melt. God, you know what I mean? Yeah, worth the wait, dude. Worth the wait. You know what I mean? It's killer. Does So I don't know. Do you think it's not worth the wait?
I think it's worth the wait. I think
Yeah.
the product we get is great. I think that part of me says we're being robbed of more material. Like
Yeah.
could be if you cut that time in half. Now there's circumstances outside of their control, that like legal troubles that delay some of these albums. So whether it's a record label or with an artist, maybe that would have taken 8 years out of this whole thing total, and we would be ahead. We'd have one more album or something like that. Do I prefer it this way to a band? Again, I mentioned Mars Volta earlier. Towards the end of Mars Volta's first run, they like put out 3 albums in a year, and that to me, it becomes so watered down. It's kind of like when a band puts out a double album. I'm really not into it, because I'm like, they're like, here, you get all this. And I'm like, yeah, I get all of this, but I would rather have 7 songs. I would rather have it be a bit more limited, and be able to like really enjoy and savor that. The wait also makes it much sweeter. I mean, honestly, when I talked about my favorite concert, you know what ousted Tool? The Guns N' Roses reunion. That ousted it. You know why? Because the freaking wait. There was no chance. There was not a chance in a lifetime that they were ever going to be a band again. Mm-hmm. So I had written that off. That was out of my mind. There was no way. So because of that, I savored it that much more.
Right.
So I think you do savor it more. I mean, I think you do have to be careful the amount that you go and see them in the meantime, because like you said, that's kind of where I was at with Primus. I kind of was like, I've seen the same show for the last 4 shows. I keep seeing the same concert, but I love Primus, so I keep going. And it's like a different reason or excuse every time to see them that makes it special. And do I have a great time? I always have a great time. So it's definitely worth the wait. Do I wish that we got a little bit more productivity in between? Yeah. I mean, Adam talked about they were off a long time because of the lawsuit stuff. And actually, it was Danny who noted, we spent, they spent like 4 years working on Fear Inoculum, 4 days a week for like 4 hours a day, just nothing but working on these songs, which isn't very common with a band to hone that much. Sometimes they go in studio and they write the whole album in a month and record it. Yeah. And these guys spent years honing these songs, and it shows. So I say worth the wait as well. You know what time it is? It's time for our final segment of the podcast, The Firing Squad. In this segment, I will be asking our guests 10 quick-fire questions. Ken hasn't seen this list of questions prior to me asking them, so his answers should be quick and simple with no explanation needed. Ken, are you ready?
I'm ready, but I still might explain anyways, but I'm ready.
All right. Number 1. Your go-to Halloween holiday classic movie.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Number 2. Favorite heavy metal guitar soloist. So that's a guitarist who plays solos in a heavy metal band.
Dimebag Darrell.
Very good. Number 3. Alien or Predator?
Ooh. Alien.
Favorite gas station snack?
Crunchy Cheetos.
I'm glad you didn't say Puffs.
Yeah, no, dude, no. It's crunchy. That's why I say crunchy, in case anybody got confused.
Number 5. What was the last movie you saw in a theater?
Ooh, it was either, I think it was Jojo Rabbit, or it was Onward, that Pixar movie with Chris Pratt. It was one of those two.
One of those were really good.
Yeah.
Number 6, Zach Wilde or Randy Rhodes?
Ooh.
We're hitting you with the hard questions
today. Yeah. I'm gonna go Randy.
Nice. Number 7, the greatest video game console of all time.
The greatest what?
Video game console, like system.
Well, I'm not really a video game guy, but I stopped at Genesis, so Sega Genesis, but I'm gonna have to go the Atari 2600, old school.
All right. What number 8 is? What is your favorite live music venue?
Ooh, I'm gonna just kind of go with the nostalgia and the grandiosity of Madison Square Garden. Being an East Coast guy, that was like the pinnacle for a lot of bands. The energy in that place, plus the Rangers play there, Knicks play there, MSG.
Great. I saw UFC there.
Yeah.
Number 9, favorite Masters of the Universe character.
Ooh. Can I pick Battle Cat? Or do I have to go with the character?
Yeah.
Battle Cat was kind of the coolest one, I thought, man.
Hey, that counts.
Although Skeletor, if you go character, I like Skeletor.
I feel like Skeletor is like the go-to for everyone. Like,
well, I mean, that's for a reason, dude, because he's hilarious and he's cool looking.
It's one of those answers where you like want to give it, but then you're like, no, everyone likes that.
Right. Right.
It's like saying you like Jimi Hendrix or Nirvana. It's like
it's definitely not Merman or whatever that guy's name was.
He-Man. Number 10, the best burger joint.
Ooh. I'm not an In-N-Out guy. I'm not convinced of an In-N-Out guy. I don't get it. They're gross but they're fun. I'm gonna go White Castle.
All right.
Yeah.
And so that was 10, but I have a bonus question coming in from one of our fans here. Hour asks, do you guys have a favorite profound lyric by Tool? That's our question number 11 for today.
I don't know. We are eternal. All this pain is an illusion is a pretty good one. But I like singing the chorus of Enema with the crowd, because I'm praying for rain. I'm praying for tidal waves. I want to see the ground give way. When everybody's singing that together, it's not like my favorite lyric from like a mystical or emotional thing, but it's like one of my favorite moments live to sing. So that's how I'm going to answer that, because I'd really have to think about this one. This is not an easy one to answer off the top of my head.
Yeah, I feel like that's a profound moment. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's not so much the profound lyric, but that collective moment in that live environment. All right. Before we wrap this up and get out of here, Ken, where can people follow your Halloween decor journey? And I know, do you have anything you want to show quick before we get out of here from your?
Oh yeah, well, actually it's all documented. Yeah, all my skull shit's kind of on the same place. My Halloween stuff, I just kind of put it up there anyways. But I'm like making art pieces, skull art pieces. The last time you and I talked, I had this Niners skull that I'd made. That I welded all together and I casted these skulls. Well, I've expanded the line a little bit. I'm starting to get some other teams going. So I got silver and black created for the Raiders and Big Blue, New York Giants. I sell these up on Sculpable on my Instagram, SKULLPABLE. I'll make any team for anybody. They're all handmade. They're all it's cast resin. It's a hard plastic. I do all the welding on the masks myself. Everything's handmade and hand painted. So it's real labor of love and a cool art piece. So if you're into football, you're into skulls, go there. I'll do any team. I'm planning on mass producing more of these, but right now they're on a one-off basis as I kind of ramp up production, and I'm using some of my methods for that. I'm just getting it off the ground, but I'm trying to get this all ready and go for Christmas orders. So if you got, a friend, a brother, a dad, or want one yourself, hit me up. I'll make them.
Great Christmas gift. Cool, unique art piece.
Yeah.
Gonna go anywhere. Remember, folks, that this episode is streamed live on YouTube. So, what you're getting right now is the live stream. We got live questions, as you have heard. People can come on, live chat with us, interact, ask questions. We'll answer them live on air. You can replay from this YouTube link from now and forever. You get the visual effects with it, so you get all the imagery that corresponds to the stuff that we're chatting about. And it'll be on all major audio podcast services starting on Monday. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts app, Google, pretty much everything. So Ken, thank you so much for being part of this episode. It's always awesome to have you.
Baxter, thanks, man. I love doing these. Appreciate you inviting me back.
Everyone stay safe out there, and we'll catch you for our next episode when we sit down with Nate Failhour and Crystal Schmidt to cover season 1 of Star Wars The Mandalorian ahead of its October 30th debut of season 2 on Disney+.
Awesome.
Thank you, and good night.